I still remember the phone call. It was just past 7 in the evening, the kind of dusky hour when the streets are caught between light and dark. The shift had been dragging. Paperwork, stale coffee, half-hearted chatter in the precinct. Nothing unusual. Then the phone on my desk rang, and the voice on the other end was tight, nervous, a missing person report. Now I had handled dozens of those before. Husbands who don't come home, teenagers who run off for the night, fights between couples that end with someone storming out. 9 times out of 10, the missing person shows up the next morning, embarrassed or angry but alive. But something about this call stuck with me. Maybe it was the voice of the neighbor, the one who reported it. She sounded off. Not panicked, not hysterical, but uneasy, like she already knew something was wrong and didn't want to put it into words. The missing person was a woman named Margaret Ellis, 42 years old, married, no children. A housewife, living in a quiet little street lined with maple trees, the kind of neighborhood where lawns are trimmed and curtains stay drawn at night. Her husband had called the neighbor in a panic because when he came home from work, Margaret was gone. The front door was unlocked. The lights were on. Dinner was half-cooked on the stove, smoke curling from a pan. But Margaret herself was nowhere in sight. I drove out there just after sunset. The neighborhood looked calm, almost too calm, as I pulled up to the Ellis house. The air had that heavy summer stillness, with insects buzzing in the hedges and the last glow of orange light sinking behind the roofs. People were out watering lawns, kids riding bikes. No one looked like they knew a woman had vanished just a few houses away. Mr. Ellis was waiting at the door when I arrived. He was in his work clothes, tie loose around his neck, face pale and drawn. He greeted me in a rush, like he was grateful to see someone official take control. I could smell the burnt food before I even stepped inside. The kitchen was a strange scene. The stove burner was still on low, a frying pan smoking faintly with something charred inside it. A cutting board sat on the counter, vegetables half chopped. A glass of water was on the table, still half full, a ring of condensation at its base. It looked like she had just stepped away for a second, like she might walk back in at any moment, apologize for being distracted, and finish dinner. But she didn't. I remember circling the kitchen slowly, taking it all in. My hand brushed the back of a wooden chair. Still warm. Someone had been sitting there not long ago. I crouched to study the floor. No signs of a struggle, no dropped utensils, no spilled water. Just absence. Mr. Ellis was talking quickly behind me, explaining how he'd left work at his usual time, how Margaret had sounded fine when they spoke around noon. He kept repeating himself, as though saying it again would make it true, would make her reappear. His voice cracked once or twice, but there were no tears. Just shock, confusion. We searched the rest of the house together. The bedroom was neat, the bed made. Closet full of clothes. Purse on the dresser, wallet inside. Nothing missing. It was as if she had walked into thin air, leaving her entire life behind without warning. I asked about friends, family, any reason she might want to leave. He shook his head. Said she was content, quiet, not the type to disappear. I wrote it all down, but in the back of my mind, something gnawed at me. When I stepped back outside, the streetlights had flickered on. The neighbor who had called us, an older woman in a faded robe, was waiting across the street. She shuffled over, clutching a cup of tea. Her eyes darted toward the Ellis house as she spoke to me. She wouldn't just leave, the neighbor whispered. I heard the radio on not an hour ago. Music playing while she cooked. Then silence. No door slam, no car pulling out, just nothing. The way she said it made the hairs rise on my neck. Just nothing. I canvassed the neighborhood for the next 2 hours. No one had seen Margaret leave. No cars unusual, no visitors. It was as though she'd melted out of her own life. Back inside the house, I kept being drawn to that kitchen table. The water glass. The chair. The faint smell of burned food hanging in the air. These things shouldn't have felt sinister, but they did. They were too ordinary, too intact. The scene wasn't chaotic. It wasn't broken. It was suspended, like time had stopped mid-motion. I bagged the glass for prints, took photos of the stove, the half-cut vegetables, the clock on the wall frozen at 6:43. But every click of the camera only made the room feel more hollow. Mr. Ellis slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. "She was just here," he kept saying. "She was just here." It was late when I left that night, though I didn't want to. Something about that house unsettled me in a way I couldn't name. Usually when I leave a missing person scene, I drive off thinking about leads, witnesses, the next steps. But with Margaret Ellis, I left with a heavy silence pressing in my chest. I sat in my car across the street for a long time, headlights off, watching the dark windows of the Ellis home. Mr. Ellis paced in the living room, a shadow moving back and forth. The house looked ordinary, but to me it felt wrong, like the air itself had shifted somehow. The neighbor hadn't gone back inside either. She stood on her porch, arms crossed tight over her chest, staring at that same house. When our eyes met across the street, she gave a tiny shake of her head, as though she already knew we wouldn't find her friend. That was the beginning. Just a missing housewife, a quiet kitchen, and a pan left burning on the stove. No forced entry, no witnesses, no explanation, but it stayed with me. The smell of smoke, the half-cut vegetables, the condensation sliding down the glass of water, ordinary things. But they became anchors in my memory, fixed to that moment when Margaret Ellis simply stopped existing. And the longer I stared at that house from my car, the more I had the strange feeling that she was still inside. Not alive, not exactly, but there, just beyond the walls where we couldn't see. Like the house itself had swallowed her whole. I kept going back to the Ellis case. It got under my skin in a way that others didn't. The first night should have been routine. Take the report, file the statements, keep an eye out. But Margaret Ellis didn't fit into routine. She wasn't a runaway, she wasn't a wife packing her bags after a fight. She was in the middle of her kitchen, halfway through cooking dinner, and then she was gone. A week later, we still had nothing. We searched the woods behind the neighborhood, the river a mile down, every abandoned shed and crawl space. Nothing. Flyers went up on poles and store windows, her smile frozen in grainy black and white. But no one came forward. No leads, no ransom, no sightings until the shoes. It was late afternoon when we got the call. A jogger had spotted something strange on the road just outside town, near the old orchard. I drove out there with another detective, and when I stepped out of the car, the air was heavy with the smell of cut grass and dirt. The road stretched empty in both directions, cracked and faded from years of sun. And there, right in the middle of it, was a single women's shoe. It was brown leather, scuffed at the toe. Size matched Margaret's. I felt my stomach sink as I crouched down to look at it. Shoes don't just end up in the middle of a quiet road like that. Not in pairs, not in trails, because as we followed the road, we found another. And then another, every few yards, another shoe. All women's. Different styles, different sizes. Some old and worn, others newer. None had feet in them. Just the shoes themselves, like they'd been placed there carefully, one by one, leading us forward. I remember the sound of gravel crunching under my boots as we followed the trail. It felt wrong, theatrical, like someone was laying out breadcrumbs, except each crumb was a piece of a person's life. A missing step frozen on the road. The trail ended at a ditch, nothing but tall weeds and still water. The shoes stopped there, as if the people who once wore them had stepped off the road and vanished. We searched the area until the sun dipped behind the orchard, but there was nothing else. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of struggle. Just the shoes left behind like discarded skins. I bagged the brown leather one first. Margaret's size, Margaret's style. I couldn't prove it was hers, but I felt it. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing the shoes laid out in my mind, stretching down the road like markers. I thought about Margaret's bare feet stepping away from her kitchen, stepping down that long, empty road. I thought about the other women whose shoes we'd found, and how many of them had names no one would ever know. The next day, I went back to the Ellis neighborhood. Sometimes cases get clearer if you return to where they started. The air smelled of cut lawns and barbecue smoke, kids riding their bikes in circles like nothing had ever happened. But the Ellis house sat quiet, curtains drawn, driveway empty. I knocked on a few doors, asked if anyone had seen Margaret since that night. Most shook their heads, offered the same rehearsed sympathy. But one man, A retired mail carrier who lived across the street leaned against his fence and looked at me strangely. "You know," he said, "I saw her. Just the other night." I froze. "When?" I asked. He scratched at his jaw. "2 nights ago, around midnight. I was out for a smoke. I saw her walking down the street, barefoot. She didn't look at me. Just kept walking, slow like she was half asleep." "Where did she go?" He gestured vaguely toward the corner where the street lamp hummed. "That way, toward the Orchard Road." I pressed him for details, but he shook his head. Said he'd assumed it was grief making him see things. Or maybe he was dreaming, but his voice didn't sound like a lie. I thanked him, but as I walked back to my car, I felt cold settle in my chest. Because the Orchard Road was exactly where the shoes had been found. That night, I drove out there alone. The orchard trees loomed like black skeletons in the dark, their branches creaking softly. I parked and walked the cracked road with a flashlight, the beam catching weeds and bits of trash. Every crunch of gravel under my feet felt like an echo. The silence was thick, pressing, until I thought I heard something faint, a shuffle, like bare feet dragging on pavement. I spun the beam, but the road was empty, just the weeds moving in the wind. I stayed out there until the battery of my flashlight flickered. Then I drove home feeling eyes on me the whole way. The reports kept trickling in after that. A teenager swore she saw a woman standing at the end of her driveway late at night, hair hanging down, dress pale in the dark. By the time she called her parents, the figure was gone. Another neighbor claimed to see a face at the Ellis kitchen window. Though the house was locked and empty, every account described her the same way, barefoot, silent, walking as if in a trance. But every time we followed up, there was nothing. The trail of shoes stayed locked in my mind. They were evidence, but also something else. They felt ritualistic, deliberate, like someone or something was leaving us a message. But if there was a message, I couldn't read it. What stuck with me most was the way the shoes just stopped, like the women who wore them hadn't kept walking, like they had stepped into nothing, and late at night, lying in bed, I would sometimes imagine the sound of footsteps outside my window. Bare feet slapping against the pavement, slow and steady. Not hurried, not panicked. Just walking, always walking away from the light, always toward the Orchard Road. And the worst part was the thought I couldn't shake, that maybe Margaret Ellis wasn't the only one. Maybe the trail of shoes had been growing for years, one missing woman after another. Maybe they were still out there, walking barefoot down that road in the dark, unseen but not gone. And sometimes when I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear them. It's been years since Margaret Ellis vanished. Cases come and go. Some get solved, others don't, but hers lingered. It sat in the back of every detective's mind like a shadow you can't quite shake. A woman gone from her own kitchen, no trace, no answers, just absence. The file ended up in the cold case room eventually. Dust settled over it. But it never felt like it belonged there, never felt closed. Every so often I would find myself opening it again, flipping through the photographs. The burned pan on the stove, the glass of water with its faint ring of condensation, the neat handwriting of my own notes, back when I still thought we might find her. The neighborhood has changed since then. Kids grew up, families moved out. The house itself has been sold twice, but no one stays long. People say it's bad luck. Others say the kitchen never feels right, that the air in there is heavy like someone still breathing just out of sight. I didn't want to believe that kind of talk. I'm a detective. I deal with evidence, facts, timelines. But even I found reasons not to drive past that house. Something in me didn't want to see it, didn't want to be reminded. Then, one night I was asked to revisit the file. Not officially, just curiosity from a younger detective, new to the department. He'd heard the story, wanted to see the house. I shouldn't have agreed, but I did. Maybe because part of me wanted to face it again, to see if the years had changed anything. We drove out there close to midnight. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deeper than silence, like the world itself is holding its breath. The Ellis house sat there like it always had, 2 stories, pale siding, porch light dead. The windows were black squares staring out. The new detective, Miller, unlocked the door with permission from the current owners who had long since moved out. They were trying to sell again, but no buyers were sticking. Inside, the air was stale, carrying that faint mix of dust and something metallic, like old pans left unwashed. The furniture was gone, stripped bare, but I still knew the layout by heart. Living room to the left, stairs ahead, kitchen in the back. I walked straight to the kitchen. My shoes echoed against the hardwood, the sound too loud in the emptiness. It looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of its life. No pans, no cutting board, no glass of water. Just faded wallpaper and cabinets hanging slightly crooked. But standing there, I could see it all again, superimposed over the emptiness. The half-cut vegetables, the smoke curling from the pan, the chair still warm where she had been sitting. Miller wandered around, whispering about how creepy it felt, but I barely heard him. My attention was fixed on that stove, on that space where she had disappeared, and then I heard it, a faint metallic sound from somewhere deeper in the house, a clatter, like a pan shifting on a stove. I froze. Miller stopped too, his voice caught mid-sentence. We waited. The house was dead silent again, but I knew what I had heard. The sound of a pan hitting metal sharp and hollow. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, eyes wide. We moved slowly through the kitchen, every step careful. The air felt charged, like before a storm, hairs rising on my arms. Another sound broke the silence, a soft scrape like a spoon stirring in an empty pot. I felt my throat go dry. The stove was cold, dusty. Nothing sat on it. But the sound came from right there, from that corner where Margaret had cooked her last meal. Miller whispered, "There's nothing here." But his voice sounded more like a question than a fact. Then came the smell. Faint at first, then stronger. The sharp, acrid scent of something burning. Not dust, not wood. Food, meat charring in a pan. My chest tightened. I had smelled it once before, on the night she vanished. Burned dinner left abandoned. I stepped back without meaning to. My heel hit the wall. The kitchen felt smaller, darker, though the lights were still on. My eyes watered as the smell thickened, even though the stove was bare. Then the sound of footsteps, soft, slow, moving across the linoleum floor, but the floor was empty. Miller whispered something I couldn't catch. His flashlight beam shook in his hand as he swept it across the room. Empty cabinets, bare counters, shadows clinging in the corners. And yet, there it was again. The distinct clang of metal on metal, like a spatula scraping the bottom of a pan, the sound of someone cooking. I couldn't breathe. My hand went instinctively to the countertop, steadying myself. The surface was warm. Not dust cold like it should have been. Warm as if a burner had just been turned off. I pulled my hand back quickly, heart pounding. I didn't want to look at the stove, but I couldn't stop staring. The more I looked, the more it seemed like I could see something faint. Heat rising, shimmering air above the burners. Miller backed toward the doorway. "We should go," he whispered. His voice cracked, but I couldn't move, because in that moment I felt it. The presence. Not in the way you see someone, but in the way your body knows when it's not alone. She was there. Margaret. Not visible, not solid, but there, in the scrape of the pan, in the smell of smoke, in the warmth left behind. I wanted to speak her name, but the words stuck in my throat. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The smells faded. The sounds died. The warmth cooled under my palm. The kitchen was just a kitchen again. Empty. Dead. Miller was pale, sweating, eyes darting everywhere. He didn't want to admit what he'd heard, what he'd smelled, but he didn't have to. We both knew. We left without a word. Locked the house, walked down the porch steps, climbed into the car. The night air felt like a release, like breaking the surface after drowning. Neither of us spoke until we were miles away. Miller finally muttered, "That wasn't possible," but it was. It happened. And the worst part? It didn't feel like Margaret was trying to reach us. It didn't feel like a cry for help. It felt like we had walked in on something that was still happening. Like time in that kitchen had frozen the moment she vanished. And it replayed itself whenever someone got too close. Someone cooking in the dark. A woman half present, trapped in the ordinary act of making dinner forever. It's been years since then. Miller quit the force not long after. He never spoke about that night again. But me? I can't forget it. Sometimes when I'm in my own kitchen late at night, I'll hear it faintly, the scrape of a spoon against a pan, the hiss of something frying when nothing's on the stove, and I'll smell it. Burned food, sharp and bitter, that's when I know. She's still there, still cooking in the dark. It started with complaints from the neighborhood. Strange noises coming from beneath the road, mostly at night. People described it as banging, scraping, sometimes even laughter echoing from the storm drains. At first, it was written off as animals, maybe raccoons or stray dogs crawling through the pipes. But the calls kept coming, louder each week, more insistent. I was sent out with another officer to take a look. I wasn't expecting much. A quiet suburban street, trimmed lawns, cul-de-sacs, kids leaving bikes in driveways. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever really happened. But the parents met us out front with pale faces, whispering about what their kids had been saying. They told us the noises weren't just random clatters. Their children swore they'd heard a boy's voice calling from the drains. I remember kneeling by one of the grates, the metal cool against my palms. I tilted my head, trying to hear past the hum of traffic. At first there was nothing, just the faint trickle of water, the hollow silence of underground space. But then, something shifted, a sound, light, high-pitched, like humming. I felt the hair rise on my arms. I couldn't make out words, not exactly, but it was melodic, almost like a child singing to himself. I jerked back, my knee scraping the pavement. My partner gave me a look like I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. We knocked on doors, asking questions. Most of the adults shrugged it off, embarrassed. But the kids didn't hesitate. They crowded around us, faces pale but eager to be heard. One boy, maybe 8 years old, said, "There's someone down there. A boy. He talks to us sometimes. Says he's been stuck a long time." Another girl nodded quickly. "He asked me to come play. He said he had toys down there." Their parents hushed them, tried to laugh it away, but their voices were too tight, too brittle. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the sound I'd heard. That faint humming, drifting up from the drain. I told myself it could have been water echoing, a trick of the ear. But deep down, I knew the difference. I'd heard something alive. We went back the next evening with a maintenance crew, flashlights and gear to check the storm system. The street was quiet, sun setting in streaks of red. The kids watched from porches as the grates were pried open one by one. I climbed down first, the ladder groaning under my weight. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and rot. My flashlight cut through the dark, catching slick walls and pools of stagnant water. The pipes stretched on in both directions, long tunnels disappearing into blackness. Every sound echoed, our boots sloshing, water dripping from overhead. My partner's light bounced ahead of me, shaky. We found nothing at first. Just empty tunnels, dead ends, rusting grates. But then I heard it again. Humming. This time, clear. Just around the bend, I froze, holding up a hand. My partner stopped. We listened, breath held. The sound was soft but unmistakable. A boy's voice, humming the same phrase over and over, like a lullaby with no end. "Hello?" I called out, my voice booming against the walls. "Who's there?" The humming stopped. Silence pressed in around us. The water dripped louder. The pipes seemed to stretch longer. My chest tightened as we waited. Then, from the darkness ahead, came a reply. A child's voice, small, fragile. "Are you here to take me home?" The sound of it echoed down the pipe, bouncing until it felt like it came from everywhere at once. My throat went dry. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who are you?" There was a pause. Then the boy whispered, "I'm cold." I shined my light forward, but the tunnel curved, swallowing the beam. My partner whispered under his breath, shaking his head, but I stepped forward anyway. "Where are you?" I called. Another pause. Then, closer now. "Here." I swung the light, expecting to see movement, a shadow, anything. But the tunnel was empty, just damp concrete and trickling water. We pushed forward, the echo of our steps chasing us. The smell grew worse, thick and sour, like something long dead. My stomach turned as we rounded the bend, and there, lying in the muck, was a small toy car. Rusted, wheels missing, caked in filth. I crouched, lifting it carefully. My partner muttered, Could have washed in from anywhere. But his voice was too quick, too defensive. I turned the toy over in my hand, and that's when I heard it. Breathing, faint, shallow, just behind us. We spun, lights cutting across the tunnel. Nothing. Empty air. But the sound was there, right behind us, inhaling, exhaling. A slow, ragged rhythm. I felt it on my neck, the damp warmth of breath where no one stood. My partner swore under his breath, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. "We need to go," he said, his voice sharp, but I stayed frozen, because in the silence that followed, the boy's voice returned, whispering, "Don't leave me here." It was so close I could almost feel the words brush my ear. My chest locked tight. My light shook across the walls, catching nothing but slime and shadows. The breathing stopped as suddenly as it began. I grabbed the toy car, shoved it into my pocket, and finally nodded. We backed out, step by slow step, until the ladder came into view. I climbed first, never taking my eyes from the black mouth of the tunnel. The air outside hit me like a wave, clean and sharp. The kids were still watching from their porches, wide-eyed. I wondered if they knew, if they'd heard him too. We sealed the grates, wrote up the report as inconclusive. No sign of trespassers, no bodies, nothing of note. Just empty drains, but I couldn't forget the voice, the way it asked if we'd come to take him home. That night, I took the toy car from my pocket, washed the filth away. Under the rust, I could still see the faint outline of a name scratched into the metal. A child's name. I didn't sleep. Not because of what I'd heard, but because I knew deep down it wasn't over. Something lived under that street. Something that hummed lullabies in the dark. And the kids weren't lying. There really was a boy in the drain pipe. I couldn't let it go. That toy car sat on my desk for days, its rusted edges cleaned just enough to reveal the outline of a name scratched into the metal. It looked like a child's handwriting. The letters were crooked, some overlapping, but I could still make it out. Tommy. It felt wrong to keep it, like holding on to something that didn't belong to me. But I couldn't throw it away either. Every time I tried to, I heard that voice again in my head, that small, trembling whisper from the drains. "Don't leave me here." I told myself I was just being thorough when I started digging through old records. Missing persons, cold cases, anything involving a boy named Tommy. Most files led nowhere, just names on yellowed paper. But then, buried under stacks of reports, I found him. A missing child from the late 70s, 8 years old. His name was Thomas Whitaker. Everyone called him Tommy. He lived just a few blocks from that street. The file was thin, barely more than a couple of statements, and a grainy photo of a boy with crooked teeth and a shy smile. He'd vanished one summer evening while playing outside. No witnesses, no suspects. Just gone. The strange part was the last item listed in the evidence log. A pair of small sneakers, scuffed and water-stained, found weeks later near a storm drain. The shoes had been logged, stored, and forgotten. My hands went cold as I read it. The exact same drain system where we'd heard the voice. I requested to see the evidence, and a clerk brought out a dusty box from the archives. Inside were the shoes, tiny faded red sneakers. The laces frayed, the soles worn thin. The moment I touched them, something pulled tight in my chest. They were heavier than they should have been, as if they'd soaked up all the years, all the silence. I set them on my desk next to the toy car. They looked like they belonged together, two fragments of a boy who never came home. I thought about his parents. The report said they'd moved away a year after the disappearance. No forwarding address, no contact. It was like grief had swallowed them whole. I should have closed the file then, marked it as unsolved, just another tragedy buried in the past. But I couldn't. The humming, the whispers, the toy with his name. It was all too much to dismiss. So I went back. The street was quiet when I arrived, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. I parked near the same drain and just stood there staring down through the grate. The darkness looked thicker than before, like it had weight. I whispered his name. Tommy, nothing. But then I thought I saw something move. Not a shadow, not exactly. More like a ripple, as if the darkness itself had shifted. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. In the silence, I kept seeing that photo of him, the crooked teeth, the shy smile, and I wondered if he was still down there somehow after all these years. The next morning, I brought the case to my partner. He frowned when I laid out the file, the sneakers, the toy car. "This is decades old," he said. "You really think there's a connection?" "I don't just think," I told him. "I know." He rubbed his temples, muttered about ghosts and imagination, but in the end, he came with me. Maybe out of loyalty, maybe just to prove me wrong. We went to the last known address listed for the Whitaker family. The house was different now. New siding, fresh paint, another family living there. They didn't know anything about the boy who used to sleep in one of those rooms. So we tracked down neighbors. Most were gone, but one woman still lived on the block. She was old now, her hands trembling as she opened the door. But when I mentioned Tommy's name, her eyes softened. "Oh," she said, voice breaking a little. "Tommy Whitaker. Sweet boy. Always polite." She told us she remembered the night he disappeared. The whole street had been out searching, flashlights sweeping the yards. She remembered the mother screaming his name until her voice cracked. When I asked about the storm drains, her face grew tight. She lowered her voice like she was afraid someone might hear. "Children used to say they heard him," she whispered, after he was gone. His voice calling up from the drains. Parents told them it was nonsense. Just grief, just imagination. But the kids, they swore it was him. Her words sank deep into me, heavy and cold. On the drive back, my partner kept glancing at me. "You don't really believe he's still down there, do you?" After all this time. I didn't answer, because belief wasn't the right word. It wasn't about faith or doubt. It was about the sound I'd heard with my own ears. That humming, that whisper. Later that week, I went back to the evidence box. I sat with those sneakers, just holding them. My hands shook. Not from fear exactly, but from something harder to name. A kind of sorrow that didn't belong to me, but had rooted itself deep anyway. I thought of the voice again. "Are you here to take me home?" And for the first time, I realized something. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't ask why I was there. He just asked if I'd take him home, like he'd been waiting for anyone. For decades. That night, I placed the sneakers and the toy car side by side on my desk. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the dim glow of the streetlight outside. And in the stillness of the room, I swore I heard it again, faint, barely there, the sound of a boy humming to himself. The Whitaker file stayed with me long after I should have set it aside. Cases like that don't just haunt the families. They sink their teeth into the people meant to solve them. And when you stare at the silence too long, it starts to look back at you. It was late one evening when I found myself back in the archives. The basement was a maze of dust and paper, shelves sagging with forgotten files. The air was damp, tinged with mold and something metallic like old pennies. I told myself I was only there to tie up loose ends, to confirm what I already knew. But really, I wanted to see if the silence had left anything behind. I went deeper into the stacks until I found a box marked Unsorted Evidence, 1970s. The cardboard was soft with age, tape yellowed and curling at the edges. Inside were dozens of smaller envelopes, each with case numbers scrawled in fading ink. I almost closed the box when I saw it, an envelope with Tommy Whitaker's case number. I pulled it out, my fingers leaving smudges in the dust. Inside were photographs, not the official kind, not prints from the police photographer. These were Polaroids, faded, curling at the corners. The first one showed what looked like the inside of a tunnel, brick walls slick with water. A faint shape crouched in the corner, blurred and pale. At first I thought it was a trick of the film. A light flare maybe, but as I leaned closer, I saw the outline of a face. Half submerged in the dark water, its features stretched and distorted. I flipped to the next photo. Another tunnel! Another blur, closer this time. A child's face, eyes wide, mouth open as if caught mid-breath. I kept turning them over one by one. In every shot there was water, and in every shot there was a face. Sometimes more than one. The worst part wasn't the faces themselves, it was the way they looked at the camera. Direct, unblinking, as if they knew they were being captured. Some were sharp enough that I could make out details. Wet hair plastered to foreheads, small hands pressing against stone. Children, dozens of them. I had to set the photographs down because my hands were shaking. They weren't evidence logged by the department. These were something else. Something slipped into the box when no one was looking. And they'd been sitting there for decades, unseen, waiting. I told myself it couldn't be real. Kids had drowned in storm drains before. Maybe these were just urban exploration photos gone wrong. Maybe the blurs were tricks of water and light, but one photo stopped me cold. The boy in it had crooked teeth and a shy smile. Even blurred, I recognized him. Tommy. The same smile from the missing poster, only now half covered in shadow, his eyes glassy and strange. He wasn't looking at the camera like the others. He was looking past it, looking at something deeper in the tunnel. I shoved the photos back into the envelope, heart hammering. My breath echoed off the concrete walls of the archive room, and for a moment I thought I heard something else. A faint hum drifting between the shelves. Low and childish, I left the box behind and didn't lock it. My hands were trembling too badly. The next morning I brought the envelope to my partner. He flipped through the photos, his face tightening with each one. "Where the hell did you get these?" he asked. "Archives. They were with the Whitaker file." "They shouldn't be. These aren't official." He turned another photo, lips pressed tight. "This looks like evidence someone wanted hidden." We sat there in silence for a long while, the weight of those images pressing down on us. Finally, he slid the envelope back to me. "If this gets out, we'll have more than a cold case. We'll have a mess we can't contain." But it was too late for me to walk away. The faces were burned into my mind. Those blurred children, trapped in water and stone. I couldn't stop seeing them. That night, I dreamed of tunnels. Endless brick passages stretching in every direction, the walls slick and dripping. The air smelled of mold and rust. I walked for what felt like hours, flashlight beam flickering, until I heard it. Small voices echoing around me. Laughter at first, then humming. Then words I couldn't make out, rising and falling with the sound of running water. I woke drenched in sweat. The toy car and sneakers still sitting on my desk. Their shadows stretched long in the streetlight glow. The next day, I went back to the street. The drain was there, waiting. I crouched beside it and whispered again, "Tommy." The silence held. Then, faint as breath, I thought I heard a splash far below, and then a sound I knew too well. The soft click of a Polaroid camera. I jerked back, heart racing, staring down into the darkness. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted, but when I closed my eyes, I could still hear it. The crack of film spitting out, the hush of wet stone, the low hum of children's voices drifting up through the drain. I didn't know who took those photographs, or how they ended up buried in a box, but I knew this. They weren't just pictures. They were windows, snapshots of something that had been there for a very long time. And when I looked at Tommy's blurred smile, I realized something else. Those children weren't only trapped in tunnels, they were still watching. Years pass, but some cases don't loosen their grip. They just wait. They sit in the back of your mind like a room you never open. And when you finally do, the air inside is stale and heavy, and you realize nothing in there ever stopped breathing. The Whitaker boy was one of those cases. Tommy, his sneakers, his toy car, the photographs, they never left me. Even when the file was marked inactive. Even when the boxes were shoved back into the archive and forgotten, like a wound you pretend is healed. I tried to bury it. I told myself the voices in the drain had been tricks of sound, echoes playing against my exhaustion. I told myself the Polaroids had been staged. Some cruel joke slipped into the file long ago. But sometimes, the truth waits until you're older, slower, more fragile, and then it comes for you. It was almost 15 years later when I found myself back on that street. The neighborhood looked smaller, worn down. The trees that once lined the road were sickly, their branches thinned out like old men hunched and coughing. I wasn't there to investigate. I was just driving through, but I slowed at the corner, right where the grate still sat in the pavement. The same drain, rusted now, weeds pushing through the cracks, and without thinking, I parked. The moment I stepped out, I felt it. The air was too still. The houses were quiet, windows shut tight. It was the kind of silence that doesn't belong in daylight, the kind that makes you feel watched. I walked to the grate and looked down. Just blackness. The faint smell of rot and water drifted up, and then, faint, almost too faint to catch, I heard it. Detective. The voice was small, fragile. A child's voice, curling up through the dark. I froze, every hair on my arms lifting. My heart hammered so hard it drowned out the world, but the voice came again. Detective, please! It wasn't just a voice calling for help. It said me. It knew me. I staggered back, but my feet wouldn't carry me far. I bent closer, clutching the cold metal bars of the grate, straining to hear. Please don't leave me here. The words scraped at something inside me. It was the same plea I'd carried in my head for years. Only now it was real, echoing against wet stone. I whispered back. My throat was dry, the words rough. Tommy? There was silence. Then the sound of water splashing, faint footsteps slapping against stone, and then my name. Not just detective, my name. Spoken in a child's voice I had never heard, but which somehow knew me. I felt a chill crawl down my spine so deep I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back to the car, slammed the door, and sat there shaking. I should have driven away. I should have let the silence reclaim that street, but I didn't. The next day I returned with another officer. Someone newer, someone who didn't know the history. I told him only that there had been reports of kids messing around the drains. We stood over the grate as the afternoon faded. The younger cop crouched, shining a flashlight down, but it only revealed wet brick, dripping pipes, a trickle of water. You sure about this? He asked. Before I could answer, the voice came again. This time it was louder, clearer. Detective, the younger cop jolted, looking up at me, eyes wide. He'd heard it too, and then both of us froze as the voice changed. It spoke his name. Not mine, his. The sound was too precise, too sharp, like someone whispering directly into his ear. He swore under his breath, backed away fast. Who the hell is down there? He shouted into the drain. No answer. Just water dripping, echoing, and then a laugh. High-pitched, childlike, but stretched thin, as if the sound had been pulled too far. That laugh followed us all the way back to the car. After that night, the younger officer refused to talk about it. Every time I brought it up, he shut down. Said it was some kind of prank, some kid with a speaker. But his face told me he didn't believe that. I stopped trying to convince him. Because deep down, I wasn't sure what I believed anymore either. But I knew one thing. Something was still down there. Something that knew our names. Something that had been waiting in the dark for years. Long after the case had grown cold. Long after Tommy's file had gathered dust. And sometimes, late at night, when I was alone in my house, I'd hear it again, the faint sound of water dripping, a laugh that wasn't mine, and a small, fragile voice whispering through the dark. Don't leave me here. There are certain calls you never forget. Not because of the blood or the crime scene or the paperwork that follows, but because something in them feels wrong from the start, like the air itself doesn't want you there. That's how it was the night we got the report about the widow on Ash Lane. It was a small town, quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. I'd been on the force long enough to know who lived where, who drank too much, who fought with their neighbors. And I knew her, Mrs. Abernathy. She was old, thin as a branch, always in black. She'd sit on her porch most nights, rocking in that chair of hers, watching the street. Some people waved, some people avoided her. I always gave a nod when I drove past. She'd lost her husband years before. They said she never left the house except to buy groceries once a month. Other than that, she stayed in that chair, rocking, staring, like she was waiting for something to come down the road. The call came in from a neighbor. Said the widow was gone, just gone. The porch light was on, the rocking chair moving, but no one sitting in it. I didn't think much of it at first. People disappear all the time. Maybe she went inside. Maybe she fell asleep somewhere else. But the way the neighbor said it, trembling, whispering, it put a weight in my stomach. When we pulled up, the house looked ordinary enough. Small wood siding faded, roof sagging a little. But the porch light was on, casting this sickly yellow glow, and the chair was moving, back and forth, slow, steady, like someone was still sitting in it. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us wanting to move closer. The street was empty, the night too still. Even the bugs were quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I finally walked up the porch steps. The wood creaked under me. My partner stayed near the gate, muttering something about the hair on his arms standing up. I reached out and touched the chair. It was warm, like someone had just been sitting in it. I looked around. The door was shut. No signs of struggle, just that empty chair, rocking on its own. We knocked, called her name, circled the house. Nothing. Inside, the air smelled stale. The living room was neat but old, curtains heavy with dust, photos of her and her husband on the walls. No sign of her. No dishes out, no note. We searched every room, upstairs, basement, even the closets. Nothing. It was as if she'd just dissolved into the night. Back outside, the neighbor was waiting, arms wrapped around herself. She told us she'd been looking out her window when it happened. She was there, the neighbor whispered, rocking like always. Then I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, she was gone. The chair never stopped moving. We pressed her, asked if anyone had come up the porch, if a car had passed by, if maybe Mrs. Abernathy had stood up and gone inside. But the neighbor swore she hadn't. She didn't walk away, she said, shaking her head. She didn't. She just vanished. That word hung between us. Vanished. We wrote the report, filed it like any other missing persons case. But I couldn't stop thinking about that chair. Over the next few nights, we drove by the house again and again. Sometimes the chair sat still. Other times it moved, slow and steady like before. Always empty. Always rocking. One night I got out again. The porch smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I touched the chair. It was warm again. I can't explain the feeling that crawled through me. Like the warmth didn't belong to something alive, but to something that had only just left. The case went nowhere. No sightings. No evidence, no body. It just sat there in the files, another unsolved. But the town didn't forget. People whispered about it in the diner, in the church pews. They said she hadn't just disappeared. She'd been taken. Some swore they saw her rocking there at night. Not the chair, her. Thin, pale, eyes staring at the road. And when they blinked, she was gone again, leaving only the chair swaying in the dark. Others claimed if you walked by the house late enough, you'd hear it. The creak of the chair, back and forth, back and forth. Even when the porch was empty, I tried to shut it out. Tried to convince myself it was all talk. The way stories grow when people need something to explain the things they can't. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wake in my own house to a sound I couldn't place at first. A slow, steady creak, back and forth. Back and forth, like wood moving under a weight that wasn't there, and I'd lay there in the dark, heart pounding, telling myself it was just the old bones of my house settling. But deep down, I knew better. I knew the sound of that chair, and I knew it hadn't stopped rocking. Not since the night she vanished. Time has a way of dulling most memories. Faces blur, names slip away, even the sharpest moments soften around the edges. But not everything fades. Some things linger. They sit at the back of your mind, heavy as a stone, waiting for the quiet moments when you least expect it. For me, one of those things was that porch, that chair, the night Mrs. Abernathy vanished. Years had passed since the report. The case was as cold as the grave. Every lead had dried up, every rumor run its course. But the image of that empty chair rocking under the yellow porch light, it never left me. I could be in the middle of a conversation, or driving past the school, or sitting at my own dinner table, and it would flicker back, the chair swaying, the seat warm beneath my hand, the silence around it. I never admitted it out loud, not even to my partner, but I sometimes drove past her house just to look. I'd slow the car as I neared the curve of Ash Lane, glance at the porch. Some nights it was empty. Some nights the chair moved on its own, gentle, like it had its own rhythm. And sometimes I swore I saw her, thin, small, shoulders hunched in her black dress. Head bowed, hands folded in her lap, just for a moment, then gone. like my eyes had tricked me. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, the mind filling in what it wanted to see. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Then came the night we were called back. It was late autumn, sky heavy, leaves clogging the gutters. A new family had bought the house, young couple, 2 kids. They lasted barely 2 weeks before they called us. Said they kept seeing things in the windows. Said the rocking chair moved at night even though they'd locked it in the shed. When we pulled up, the house looked the same as always. Dark, sagging porch light, still that sickly yellow. The family waited on the curb with their bags packed, shivering even though the night wasn't cold. They didn't want to go back inside. Didn't even want to look. We told them we'd check it out. Inside, the air was different than I remembered. Heavier, staler, like a place that had been closed up for years, even though people had been living there. We walked through the rooms. Nothing out of place. Furniture still there, wallpaper peeling, photographs gone. But it didn't feel empty, it felt watched. Every creak of the floor made me flinch. Every shadow seemed thicker than it should have been. My partner muttered under his breath, asking why we always got the strange ones. Then we reached the living room. That's when I saw it. The rocking chair. I froze in the doorway, because I knew that chair. The same faded cushions, the same worn arms, the same scratches along the legs, but it wasn't supposed to be there. The family had locked it in the shed, and it was moving. Slow, steady, back and forth. Back and forth. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My partner whispered, "Do you see that?" His voice was thin, like he already knew the answer. I stepped closer, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the chair. And that's when I noticed the reflection. The window beside it showed the porch, the yard, the dark street. But in the glass, in the faint glow of the porch light, there was a face. Not mine. Not my partner's. Hers. The widow. Her eyes were wide, too wide, staring straight back at me. The kind of stare that feels like it pierces you. I swear the reflection wasn't even lined up with the chair. It was closer, pressed against the glass, like she was standing right there waiting. I blinked, and the face was gone. The chair kept rocking. My partner cursed and backed into the hall, muttering that we should leave, that it wasn't worth it. But I couldn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor. I stared at that window, waiting for the face to come back. Waiting for some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. The silence in the room was suffocating. The kind that presses in on your ears until all you can hear is your own pulse. Finally, I forced myself to touch the chair again. It was warm, hot, even, like someone had been sitting there for hours. I yanked my hand back and stumbled away. We searched the house again, top to bottom. No one else was inside. No open windows, no footprints, no signs of a break-in. Just that chair, rocking like it was caught in a breath of wind no one else could feel. When we told the family, the wife burst into tears. She said she knew it. She knew something was wrong in there. Said she saw a woman in the window every night staring down at her kids while they slept. They left that night. Never came back. The house sat empty again, waiting for the next unlucky souls who didn't know the story. As for me, I tried to shake it. I tried to bury it the way I'd buried the first time, but I couldn't. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw hers. Those wide, unblinking eyes. Not sad. Not angry, just waiting. Like she knew something I didn't. And the worst part was, the more I thought about it, the more I realized those eyes hadn't been on me. Not really. They'd been looking past me, over my shoulder, into the dark. As though whatever she'd been waiting for that night on her porch had finally arrived, and she was watching it. Even now, through the glass. The first time I saw the school, it looked like nothing more than another forgotten building. Peeling paint, shattered windows, rusted swings that creaked whenever the wind caught them. A place left to rot out here in the middle of nowhere. But the truth is, I already knew the story before I arrived. Everyone did, at least in the nearby towns. You couldn't grow up within 100 miles and not hear the whispers about it. They said 14 children went missing there, all at once, all in the same day. No bodies, no clues, not a single footprint leading out of the place. Just empty desks and scattered notebooks, as if the kids had simply stood up and walked out into thin air. That was over 30 years ago. No answers then, and none since. I wasn't even supposed to be there. The case was buried deep, sealed away in the archives, more folklore than investigation. But something about it tugged at me. I'd been combing through old files for another cold case when the folder fell into my lap. It was thin, almost insultingly so. A few photographs, handwritten witness statements, a map of the school grounds, and a single Polaroid of a classroom. That photo is what stayed with me. I couldn't stop staring at it. The desks were neat, little chairs pushed in, sunlight slanting across the floorboards. But every single one of those desks had something left behind. Pencils, crumpled drawings, tiny sweaters draped over the backs of the chairs. The children should have been there, but they weren't. The silence in that picture was louder than any scream. So I drove out. It was late afternoon when I pulled up, the sky already dimming with that heavy gray kind of light that makes the world look drained of color. The school sat alone at the end of a dirt road, tucked against a line of skeletal trees. The front doors hung crooked, one barely clinging to its hinges. I had to shove them open, the sound echoing far too loud inside. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mold, though there was plenty of that. It was chalk dust, dry, faint, clinging to the back of my throat, as if someone had just finished writing on the blackboard minutes before. I walked the hall slowly, every footstep raising little puffs of dust. The walls were lined with old student drawings curling at the edges, crayon stick figures with wide smiles, suns in the corners of the pages. Houses with crooked chimneys, they looked fresh, too fresh. My gut twisted as I kept going. When I reached the first classroom, I stopped, because it was exactly like the photo. Rows of desks, small, wooden, scarred by years of use. Books left open, pages yellowing. Lunchboxes still sitting on the floor. 14 desks, all of them empty. I swear the air grew heavier in that moment, pressing down on me, filling my lungs with something cold. My eyes flicked across the room, waiting for movement, waiting for a sound, anything. But it was silent. Not just quiet, silent. Even outside, the wind had stopped. I forced myself to step inside. My hand brushed the edge of a desk, and I froze. It was warm. I jerked my hand back, staring at the chair, at the notebook left open on the surface. The pencil was still resting across the page, as though someone had just been writing. The words on the paper were shaky, uneven. It said, "She's here." The letters dug deep into the page, carved in desperation. I felt a prickle at the base of my neck, that animal sense of being watched. Slowly, I looked toward the blackboard. There was writing there too, faint, smudged, but still visible. "Be quiet." The chalk lay on the tray beneath, snapped in half. My breath caught. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at those words, feeling like I had stepped into the exact moment the children had disappeared. Because nothing about the room felt old. Nothing about it felt abandoned. It felt waiting. I heard something then. A shuffle, faint, like shoes scuffing the floor. I spun, but the desks were empty, the door still open behind me. I told myself it was my imagination. The building settling. Rats. Anything to explain it. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I forced myself out into the hall, lungs burning as if I'd been holding my breath. The other classrooms were the same. Each one with desks left full of the ordinary clutter of children's lives. Papers, half-finished math problems, doodles in the margins, and in every room, one desk carried a single word, scratched deep enough to splinter the wood. Quiet. I kept moving until I reached the cafeteria. The tables were still set. Plastic trays in neat rows, cups stacked, spoons lined up. Like a lunch had been ready to serve that day, but no one ever came to eat it. I stared at those empty trays and imagined the sound of 14 children laughing, shouting, scraping chairs across the floor. The noise of life that should have been there. But instead, there was nothing. The silence pressed against my ears until I wanted to scream just to break it. Instead, I whispered, "Where did you go?" My own voice echoed back to me, thin and strange in the empty space. I don't know why I asked. Maybe I thought if the children were still here somehow, they'd answer. And in a way, they did. A soft sound rose up, so faint I almost missed it. It came from the far side of the cafeteria near the old stage, a whisper, high-pitched, childlike. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to freeze me in place. Enough to make the hair on my arms rise. It lasted only a few seconds. Then silence again. I knew I should leave. I knew I had no business being there, no backup, no explanation for why I was even poking at a case this old. But I couldn't turn back. Not after what I'd seen, not after hearing that voice. The children had been here, and something had taken them. Something that still lingered between these walls. I left as the sun was setting, shadows long across the playground, the sky bleeding red. I told myself I'd come back with proper equipment, with a reason, with something more than just curiosity. But as I drove away, I looked back one last time. Through the cracked window of that first classroom, I saw movement. A chair sliding out from a desk, a shadow shifting in the corner, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a hand pressed against the glass. Small, pale, and waiting. I didn't sleep the night after visiting the school. I tried. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of my fridge in the next room. But the silence of that building kept replaying in my head. The rows of empty desks, the word quiet carved into the wood, the whisper I thought I'd heard near the cafeteria stage. I kept seeing that little handprint on the glass in my rearview mirror as I drove away. I told myself I imagined it, but the truth was, I didn't believe myself. The next day, I went back into the case file. There had to be something I'd missed. That's when I found it. At the bottom of the folder, wedged between two typed reports, was a handwritten note. It was faint, the ink bled into the paper, but it mentioned an item collected from the scene. Ledger from front desk. No photo, no details, just those 3 words. But I knew what that meant. The teacher's ledger. Every school back then kept one. Attendance records, notes about behavior, assignments. If it had been collected, maybe it still existed in evidence storage. And after a few hours of digging, I found it. The box was dusty, mislabeled, buried beneath stacks of forgotten cases. When I opened it, the smell hit me. Old paper, mildew, something sharp that reminded me of iron. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, was the ledger. The cover was cracked, edges curled. But when I opened it, the writing was shockingly clear. The first pages looked normal. Dates neatly written across the top, the children's names listed down the side. 14 names, I whispered them under my breath as I traced the lines with my finger. I don't know why. Maybe I felt like they deserved to be remembered. Sarah, Michael, James, Emily, Daniel, Rebecca, on and on. 14 small names, frozen in time. Attendance marks filled the boxes. Present, 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 until the very last day. That row was blank. All of them. Not absent, not tardy, just nothing. I flipped the pages slowly. At first they were empty. Then, faint at first, came the scratches. Not words. Not legible ones, at least. Just jagged lines gouged into the paper. Over and over. Page after page. Like someone had taken a pencil and scrawled furiously until the lead snapped. Then started again. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Whole pages torn through. Paper shredded. And then I found the words, scrawled in between the chaos. Faint but unmistakable. Don't look at her. My chest tightened as I stared at it. The letters dug so deep the page had nearly ripped in half. Another page. She told them to be quiet. And another. She's still here. I felt the air in my apartment grow heavier, like I'd brought something back with me. My hand shook as I turned the pages. The last entry stopped me cold. 14 names, written again. But not in neat columns. They were scattered across the page, scribbled over each other, barely legible. Each one scratched out, every single one. I slammed the book shut and sat there, staring at the cover. My heart thudded in my chest, my throat dry. It wasn't just a record of attendance. It was a record of something else. Something that happened to those children, and it was written by someone who had been there. The teacher. I didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to think that maybe she'd been part of it, whatever it was. But the more I thought about the words, "Don't look at her," the more I wondered if she'd been warning them or warning herself. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the school. About the ledger sitting on my table, radiating like a wound. I dreamed of it. The sound of chairs scraping. The whisper of chalk on a blackboard. Children's voices muffled like they were calling from under the floor. And then, the sound of someone else. A woman's voice, sharp and clear. "Be quiet." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering. The ledger was still there. Closed. But I swear the air around it felt wrong. Too still. I didn't touch it again. Not that night. The following day, I drove back out to the school. I told myself it was to gather more evidence, to see if anything in the building matched what I'd read. But the truth was I felt pulled back, like something was waiting for me there. The hallways were darker this time, though it was midday. Clouds covered the sun, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I walked into the first classroom. The desks were the same, the notebooks untouched. But when I glanced at the blackboard, the words had changed. They weren't faint anymore. They were sharp, clear, written in fresh white chalk. "Don't look at her." My stomach dropped. I backed out, nearly tripping over a chair. The next classroom said the same thing. And the next. Every single blackboard, all of them repeating the words from the ledger. By the time I reached the end of the hall, I was shaking. I felt the whisper of movement behind me like small feet padding across the floor. I spun around. Nothing. But I swear the desks were different, pulled slightly out as if chairs had just been pushed back. My chest ached with the need to get out, to breathe air that wasn't heavy with the past. But before I left, I forced myself to check the last classroom, and there, written in larger letters than all the rest, was a message that made my blood run cold. "She is not gone." The chalk had snapped under the pressure of the writing, leaving fragments scattered along the tray. I didn't wait after that. I stumbled down the hall, through the double doors, and out into the gray daylight. Even out in the open air, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me. Small eyes, dozens of them. I drove away faster than I should have, heart pounding in my throat, hands slick on the wheel. But I couldn't escape the words burned into my head. Not the scratched out names. Not the warnings carved into paper and scrawled across blackboards. She is not gone. The teacher knew it. And now, so did I. I don't know why I went back a third time. Any normal detective would have handed the case back to the archives. A school abandoned for 20 years. 14 missing children. No bodies, no suspects, no answers. It should have been left to rot in silence, like it had for decades. But silence is exactly what made it impossible to forget. That ledger hadn't just unsettled me. It had attached itself to me. The words still echoed in my head every time I closed my eyes. "Don't look at her." She told them to be quiet. She is not gone. It was like the book had been waiting for someone to open it again, and I had. That's why I went back. Not because of duty, not even because of the children. I went back because I felt like if I didn't, the silence would follow me home and never leave. That day, the air was heavy with rain. I could smell it before I even parked the car. The school loomed against a sky the color of old bruises. Windows dull and lifeless. The kind of building that swallows sound. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Damp. Heavy. My flashlight cut through dust motes that drifted like tiny ghosts. This time, I didn't go to the classrooms. I didn't want to see the blackboards again. I went to the lockers. They were lined up in long rows against the corridor walls. Metal doors faded to dull gray. Some hung open, others were still latched shut. Their hinges creaked when I passed, though I didn't touch them. I kept thinking about the police report I'd read years back. It said the children disappeared during recess. That detail had always haunted me. They weren't taken in the middle of the night. They weren't snatched on their way home. They were here one moment and gone the next. Their belongings were never claimed. I crouched in front of the first locker, ran my hand across the cool metal, and then tugged the handle. It opened with a groan. Inside was a pink backpack. The fabric was faded but still soft to the touch. There was a keychain dangling from the zipper, a little teddy bear with one eye missing. I unzipped it slowly. Inside were notebooks filled with bubble letters and doodles. A sandwich wrapped in plastic, now nothing but dust and mold. And tucked in the front pocket, a folded picture. It was a drawing, done in crayons. 14 stick figures lined up in front of the school, smiling faces, bright colors. Above them, written in clumsy letters, "Us." I put the paper back and closed the locker. The next one was a boy's, a baseball glove stiff with age. A lunchbox with a superhero painted on it. Inside the lunchbox was a half-finished juice box, straw still sticking out, like he'd meant to come back after recess. Like they all had. One by one, I opened them. Each locker was a time capsule. A scarf that still smelled faintly of perfume. Sneakers with untied laces, homework scrawled in pencil. A toy car, a diary that ended mid-sentence. The air grew thicker as I went down the row. My skin prickled with goosebumps because nothing felt old. It should have been dust and rot. Instead, it felt like the children had just stepped away for a moment, as if at any second, the hallway would fill with their voices again. I stopped at a locker near the end. This one was dented, the handle bent. It resisted when I pulled it, then swung open with a metallic shriek. Inside was only one thing, a pair of shoes. Small, black, polished. Placed neatly side by side, and underneath them, a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, but the writing was fresh. It wasn't a child's handwriting. It was jagged, uneven. She told us to line up. I dropped the paper. My stomach lurched, because I could hear it. Not out loud, not exactly, but in my head. The scrape of benches, the shuffle of shoes, children lining up in silence, obedient, afraid. I stumbled back and nearly tripped over my own feet. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Small shadows clustered around the lockers, watching. I forced the light back steady. The hallway was empty, but the shoes weren't where I'd left them. They were turned outward, as if someone had just stepped into them. I backed away, heart hammering, breath catching in my throat. Every instinct told me to leave, to run, to slam the doors shut behind me. But my eyes drifted to one last locker. It was at the very end of the row. Unlike the others, this one had been padlocked shut. The lock was old, rusted. But when I touched it, it snapped open like it had been waiting. Inside, there was nothing, at least not at first. But when I raised my flashlight higher, I saw it. Scratched into the back wall of the locker. 14 names, each one carved deep, letters uneven, as if done in a hurry. The same names from the ledger, but there was a 15th name too, not carved. Written in chalk, faint and smudged. My name. I dropped the light. The beam swung wildly across the floor, shadows stretching like long arms. My knees went weak, my stomach hollow. How could it know me? How could my name be there, etched into the silence of a locker abandoned for decades? I slammed it shut. The metal rang out like a gunshot through the halls. The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls, repeating, until it almost sounded like laughter. I didn't run, not at first. My legs wouldn't move. But then, from the end of the corridor, a locker door creaked open on its own. Then another, and another. One by one, the doors began to swing open, metal groaning, echoing through the silence, until the whole hallway was alive with sound. Every locker gaping, spilling open, waiting for something to crawl back inside. That's when I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the rain, the school looming behind me like a corpse that refused to rot. But even then, I couldn't shake the thought. The belongings had been left untouched, as if the children would one day return for them. But they hadn't. And maybe they never would, because something else was waiting for me in there now, something that had already written my name among theirs. When I first heard about the substitute, I thought it was just another rumor. Small towns cling to their stories like lifeboats. And after what happened in that school, people had been telling stories for years. But this wasn't just gossip. The name came up in the survivor interviews. Not just once, several times. A substitute teacher that no one could describe clearly. The strange thing was, there weren't supposed to be any substitutes. 14 kids disappeared in a single day. The records showed only 3 staff members were on duty that morning: the head teacher, an assistant, and a janitor. All 3 were questioned. Their alibis checked out. No one mentioned anyone else. Not officially. But in the interviews, in the quiet, shaky voices of the children who had been in other classes that day, the same figure appeared again and again. A woman, thin, tall. Hair pulled tight into a bun. They called her the substitute. One child, now grown, said she was sitting in the back of the classroom watching. Not teaching, just watching. Another said she was at the window during recess, her face pale, hands folded. None of them remembered her name. When I pressed harder, the details got stranger. She never blinked. She didn't move her mouth when she talked. She wasn't really there. I tried to write it off as memory warped by trauma. Kids see something they can't understand. They fill in the blanks. But the consistency of it bothered me. These survivors hadn't seen each other in decades. Their stories shouldn't have lined up, and yet, every time, they did. The substitute. The one no one was supposed to remember. I tracked down one of them myself. A woman named Carol, now in her 40s, who had been 8 years old at the time. She lived in a rundown apartment on the edge of town, blinds drawn, the kind of place where time seemed to sit heavy in the air. She didn't want to talk at first, but when I mentioned the school, her hands started to shake. She lit a cigarette and stared at me through the smoke. "You don't want to know," she said. "I have to." Her eyes darted to the window, as if checking for something. Then she whispered, "She wasn't supposed to be there." I asked her who she meant. The substitute. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. Like the word itself had weight. Carol told me she had seen the woman in the hallway, standing by the lockers. Tall, thin, hands clasped in front of her. "Watching the children?" I asked her name, Carol said. She leaned down. She smelled like wet dirt. And she whispered, "I'm just filling in." She flicked ash into the tray, hand trembling. Her teeth weren't right. Too many of them. I didn't know what to say. Carol went quiet after that. She wouldn't answer more questions. She just muttered that the substitute wasn't gone. That she only comes when the children are quiet. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Carol had said. "I'm just filling in," it echoed in my head like the ledger had. So I went back to the files. Most of them were useless. Old reports, faded photographs, testimonies from parents who'd never stopped grieving. But then I found something buried in the margins of one officer's notes. A teacher from another district had apparently applied to work as a substitute around that same time. The name was scratched out, unreadable. The file ended there. No follow-up. No record of her ever being hired. But it was something. I stared at that blank space. On the paper for a long time. Because I had the same feeling I did when I saw my own name carved into that locker. Like someone had erased her on purpose. The next day, I went back to the school. I told myself it was just to confirm details, to make sure I hadn't missed anything in the rooms or the lockers. But really, I wanted to see her. I wanted to see if she was real. The halls were as cold as ever, the air heavy, unmoving. I stopped outside one of the classrooms. The desks were still lined up neatly, little chairs tucked in. I stepped inside, and for a moment I swore I could hear chalk scratching faintly on the blackboard, but the board was blank. I sat down at one of the desks. The wood creaked under my weight. I tried to imagine what it had been like. Children laughing, pencils scratching, the smell of erasers and crayons. And then I noticed something. At the back of the classroom, one chair was pulled out, not dusty like the others. I felt my chest tighten. I walked slowly toward it. My flashlight beam shook across the wall, and that's when I saw it. Something faint, written in chalk, almost erased. "She is still watching." I staggered back, nearly knocking the chair over. My flashlight flickered, shadows stretching across the walls. For a second, I thought I saw her, a figure in the corner, thin, hair pulled back tight, watching me. But when the light steadied, the corner was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the smell that lingered in the room, damp, like wet soil. I left in a hurry, the silence pressing in tighter with every step. When I got back to my car, I sat behind the wheel, shaking. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there staring at the school through the rain-streaked windshield. And in that reflection, for a brief, impossible second, I thought I saw someone sitting in the back seat, hair pulled tight, face pale, watching. When I turned, there was no one there. But I swear to you, the seat was wet, like someone had been sitting there dripping with rain or dirt. It's been years since I first opened that file, years since I walked the halls of that school. I told myself I was done with it, that some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. But the truth is, it never left me. The smell of chalk dust and damp wood still follows me sometimes, like it clings to my clothes. And then I started hearing about the bells. It began as small talk among patrol officers, the kind of thing cops whisper over coffee in the middle of the night. They said if you drove near the old school around dawn, just before the sun broke, you could hear the bell ring at exactly 8 o'clock. Not the faint creak of metal, not the wind pushing something loose. A bell, loud, clear. The school's bell had been disconnected for decades. I laughed it off the first time I heard it. Some trick of the air, I told myself. Maybe the officers wanted a ghost story to pass the time. But the more I heard it, the harder it became to ignore. Different people, different nights, always the same thing. 8 a.m. Sharp. The stories bothered me enough that I finally drove out there myself. It was a gray morning, the kind where the sky feels heavy and low. The roads were slick with rain, the air thick with fog. When I pulled up by the school, the building looked worse than I remembered. Roof sagging, windows clouded with grime. The fields around it were nothing but weeds and rusted fences. I sat in my car and waited. 7:55. The school was silent. No birds, no wind, just silence. 7:58. I felt myself leaning forward, palms sweating against the steering wheel. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that even if I heard something, it would just be metal contracting in the cold, or some farmer's machinery echoing in the valley. 7:59. The silence pressed in tighter. My ears rang with it, and then the bell rang. Loud, clear. The sound cut straight through me, sharp as a blade. It wasn't faint or broken. It was the exact sound a school bell should make. Clean, perfect, 8 a.m., sharp. I froze in my seat, heart hammering. The bell rang again. I could almost see the children it called. Small hands clutching books, shoes tapping down the hallway. Voices spilling through the doors, but the school stayed silent. The doors stayed closed. And yet, in the moment that bell echoed, I swore I heard something else too. Faint, layered beneath the sound. Children laughing. I sat there long after the bell stopped, unable to move. My coffee went cold in the cup holder. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I wanted to hear something because I'd been chasing this case too long. But when I asked the other officers later, they all said the same thing. The laughter was real. One of them, a young guy named Hughes, said he saw movement in the windows that morning. Little shadows running past the glass. He hasn't driven that route since. I thought that would be the end of it. Just another story I'd add to the pile, another detail I'd never make sense of. But the bells kept ringing. Every morning. Every single one. And people started to notice. Farmers said their animals got restless at 8 sharp, pacing, kicking, staring at the school with wide eyes. Parents swore their kids would wake up at the sound, even miles away, asking why the school was calling them. The worst was when one officer swore he saw the front doors open as the bell rang. Just a crack. Just enough to let something out. I tried to test it myself. I went back the following week, parked in the same spot, watched the doors as the minutes ticked down. 7:59. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt. 8 a.m. The bell rang, loud enough to shake the windshield, and I swear on everything I have left The doors moved. Just a sliver. But they moved. The sound of children poured out, faint but unmistakable. The scrape of chairs, the shuffle of shoes. I nearly got out of the car. My hand was already on the door handle, but then the smell hit me. Wet dirt. The same smell Carol had described years ago. The smell that clung to the substitute. I pulled my hand back and drove away as fast as I could. For days after, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The bell, the laughter, the smell. I started to wonder if the school wasn't just empty anymore. If maybe, piece by piece, something was waking up inside it. One morning, I forced myself to drive past without stopping, just to prove I could. I kept my eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel. The bell rang as I passed, and in my rearview mirror, I saw the playground. The swings were moving, not swaying in the wind, moving back and forth, as if invisible children were playing there. I almost ran off the road. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. I couldn't. It sounded insane even in my own head. But that night when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed I was back inside the school. The desks filled with children, faces I couldn't recognize. And at the front of the classroom, the substitute stood, hands clasped, watching me. The bell rang in the dream. It jolted me awake. I checked the clock on my nightstand, 8 a.m., and for a second, I thought I still heard it. Not in the dream, in the world around me, clear as day. The next morning, I packed the file away. I told myself I was done, that if the bells wanted to keep ringing, they could. I wasn't going to be there to listen anymore, but the truth is, I still hear them sometimes, when the house is quiet, when the morning light starts to spill through the blinds. I swear I catch the faint ring of that bell, calling children that aren't there, calling me. I'll never forget the silence of that farmhouse. When people go missing, there's usually some kind of sign. A broken lock, a car left running, a phone off the hook, something that tells you there was a struggle or at least a reason. But when we pulled up that morning, the house just sat there, quiet, waiting. It was a two-story place on the edge of nowhere, paint peeling off the siding, barn leaning against the horizon. A mailbox rusted half shut with the family's name, Carsons. Neighbors had called in to say they hadn't seen them in days. No lights on at night. No movement in the fields. Not even the sound of the dogs barking anymore. We parked out front, tires crunching on gravel. The sun was low, weak, throwing long shadows over the yard. I remember the wind carrying the smell of cut hay, sharp and sweet. But there was nothing else. No sound of chickens, no tractors, no radio from the porch. Just silence, heavy and strange, pressing against the skin. I knocked on the door first. No answer. I tried again, louder, my knuckles echoing through the hollow house. Still nothing. The door wasn't locked. It swung open easy, like someone had left it that way. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not rot, not yet. Just the faint sour scent of food left too long on a counter. Inside, everything looked paused. Breakfast dishes still on the table. A pan on the stove with eggs blackened to crust. Coffee mugs half full, cold to the touch, but no people. I walked from room to room, calling their names. Mr. Carson? Mrs. Carson? My voice felt too loud in the empty halls. The sound didn't carry right. It was like the house swallowed it before it reached the walls. Upstairs, the beds were made. Children's rooms neat, clothes folded, dolls tucked into corners. Nothing broken, no blood, no sign anyone had left in a hurry. It looked like the family had simply stood up from breakfast and walked out the door together, but they hadn't. Their shoes were still lined up by the door, their jackets still on the hooks, the car still. Parked in the driveway, it was the wrong kind of missing. We stepped back outside. The silence felt thicker, like it was crowding in on us. That was when I noticed the well. It stood behind the farmhouse, a few yards from the barn. Old stone, rim cracked, bucket rotting on a frayed rope. I wouldn't have thought much of it if not for the way the wind shifted just then. For a second, I thought I heard something. Not the wind, not the barn creaking, something from down below. I walked closer, boots crunching dry grass. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, like the well was leaking a chill into the morning. I leaned over the edge, looking down into the dark. The stone throat dropped so far the bottom was swallowed in shadow. That was when I heard it again, a sound rising up from the black. Not water, not echoes, something like breathing. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My partner asked what I'd seen, but I couldn't answer. I just kept staring at the dark mouth of that well, waiting for it to move, waiting for something to climb out. But nothing did. We called in for more units, for dogs, for a full search. They combed the fields, the barn, the woods beyond. But there was nothing. No tracks, no footprints, no trail. It was like the family had been lifted straight out of their lives. The only place we didn't search that first day was the well. We told ourselves it was too deep, too dangerous without the right equipment. But the truth is, none of us wanted to get closer. That night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The farmhouse, the silence, the way the breakfast dishes still waited on the table, and the well, always the well. I dreamed of it. Dreamed I was leaning over the edge again, staring into the black. But this time, I wasn't alone. There were faces down there, pale, half-seen, rising toward me through the dark water. Their mouths open, but no sound came out. When I woke, my throat was sore, like I'd been screaming. The next morning, I went back. I told myself it was to double-check the house, to make sure we hadn't missed anything. But I knew where I was really going. The well was waiting. The grass around it looked different now, flattened, almost as if people had been circling it in the night. I leaned over again, shining my flashlight into the dark, and for a moment, I saw something. Not water, wood, the faint outline of something wooden, just under the surface, like furniture or a table, like maybe the whole family's kitchen had been pulled down there. The beam shook in my hand. The smell hit me then, damp, earthy, wrong, like the breath of something that had been waiting too long. I pulled back, gasping for air, heart pounding. The silence of that farm pressed in again, thicker than ever. And in the stillness, I thought I heard it once. More. Not breathing this time, not even voices, just the faint sound of silverware clinking, like dinner was still being served. Down in the dark. The well had been sitting in my mind for days, even. When I wasn't on the property, I could still feel it, like a weight pressing at the back of my skull. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the black throat of stone, feel the cold air seeping out, and I'd hear it again, that faint clinking, that sound no one else admitted hearing. It was only a week later, after a dry spell in the weather, that the county finally agreed to pump the well. They wanted to clear it, rule it out before rumors spread. People in towns like that, they don't let things go, and whispers had already started. I drove out early. The sky was gray, clouds hanging heavy, promising rain. The farmhouse looked worse than before. Curtains drawn tight, the front porch sagging as if the house itself was tired of waiting. The crew was already there when I arrived. A pump set up by the well, long hoses running to a tank truck. Men in overalls and work gloves smoking cigarettes to fight off the morning chill. They joked to each other, but their eyes kept sliding back to the stone ring at their feet. I joined them, but I didn't joke. I kept my hands in my pockets, watching the hose rattle and gurgle as the pump began to roar. It took hours. The water had sat in that well for decades, black and stagnant. The smell that came up as they drained it turned my stomach. Not just rot, something deeper. Something sour and old, like wet soil mixed with rust. When the last of the water finally slid away, the pump coughed dry. The men leaned over, shining lights into the hole. At first, we couldn't see anything but mud. Thick, black, clotted. Then the beams caught on something pale. It looked like driftwood at first. But driftwood doesn't come in ribs. The mud shifted, sloughing off in chunks, and more white shapes came into view. Long, narrow, stacked over each other, bones, not just one, not just scattered, dozens. I felt my chest tighten, air locked in my throat. The workers backed up, swearing under their breath. One crossed himself. Another threw his cigarette down and ground it into the dirt with his boot. We lowered a ladder, though nobody wanted to be the first to climb. Finally, I volunteered. I don't know why. Maybe because I was the detective. Maybe because I couldn't stop myself. The stone walls were slick, cold against my hands as I climbed down. The smell grew sharper, heavier. I tried not to breathe too deep. My boots sank into the thick mud at the bottom with a sound like sucking lips. The light cut across the shapes at my feet. It wasn't just bones. It was skeletons, some old, yellowed, brittle. Others, not so old, and they weren't scattered the way you'd expect. Not the way nature would leave them. They were arranged, ribs stacked into ribs, skulls placed one beside another like jars on a shelf. Femurs lined like fence posts, side by side. It wasn't random. It was careful, intentional. Someone had built something out of them. I crouched lower, flashlight trembling in my hand. The arrangement wasn't just neat. It was patterned, almost like rows, layers, as if whoever had placed them wanted it to be seen. That was when I noticed the gap, a space left open in the middle of the arrangement, a hole in the pattern, empty, waiting. And in that silence, down there in the belly of the earth, I had the sickest thought. It was waiting for more, for them, for the Carsons, for anyone. My chest tightened again. I climbed out fast, boots slipping, palms scraping against stone. When I reached the top, the men looked at me, their faces pale, their jokes gone. I didn't tell them everything. I just said, bones, too many of them. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way they were placed. That night in my report, I tried to write it straight. Remains found, human, number unknown, possible crime scene. But the words kept slipping. I almost wrote arranged 3 times before scratching it out. The word arranged doesn't belong in a police report. It belongs in a nightmare. I went home late, sat at my kitchen table with the lights off. The house creaked around me. My coffee went cold before I even touched it. All I could see were the empty sockets of those skulls, the neatness of it, the gap left open. When I finally slept, I dreamed I was back at the farmhouse. The pump roaring, water spilling out onto the grass. But the water wasn't clear. It was thick, dark, and it carried the bones with it. They spilled across the field, clattering, rolling, but they didn't scatter. They crawled, each piece dragging itself, inch by inch back toward the hole, back toward the well. I woke gasping, nails dug into the wood of my table. The dream clung to me all day. By the time I returned to the site the next afternoon, the remains had already been bagged, tagged, and taken away. The well sat empty, gaping, just stone and mud. But I swore the silence around it was even heavier now, like the land itself was listening. I stood there staring into it, the wind lifting the hair on the back of my neck. And for a second, I thought I saw something move down there. Not a shadow, not water, just the faintest shift, like bones settling, like the pattern repairing itself. I stumbled back, almost tripping in the grass. My heart slammed against my ribs, my hands trembling. That night, I didn't dream. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sound of silverware, waiting for the silence to press in again. And I knew, deep in my gut, that the Carsons weren't gone. Not yet. They were waiting, too. Waiting for the well to finish what it had started. They sealed the well after the bones were taken. Poured concrete down until the throat of it was closed. Smoothed it over like a scar. The county wanted the whole thing erased. No more whispers, no more late-night dares from kids daring each other to peek inside. The Carsons' farm was boarded up, the land marked condemned. On paper, it was finished. But the truth is, nothing really stays buried out there. I wasn't even on the force when it started again. By then, years had passed. The files were old, buried under dust. I only knew about the case because of what it did to the older detectives. The way their voices would lower when the farmhouse came up. The way they'd trade looks and then fall silent. And then one night, it began. It was a routine patrol, 2 officers driving the back roads near the farm. They said the air was heavy, the kind of stillness that makes you roll your shoulders, like you're wearing a weight you can't see. The house was just a shadow against the tree line. The well hidden somewhere in the dark grass. That's when they heard it. A sound, soft and faint, humming. They slowed the car, rolled down the windows. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't the engine. It was outside, rising up from the earth, carried on the still air. A lullaby. Not words, just that low, swaying melody. the kind you hum to a child at night when you're trying to hush them to sleep. The officers froze. They swore it was coming from the well, the sealed well. One of them laughed, but it was the kind of laugh you give when you're forcing the fear back down. The other officer, he turned pale. He said he'd heard it before, years ago. Back when the Carsons still lived there, he said he'd been called out for a noise complaint once, back when neighbors thought the family was fighting. He stood by the porch, listening, and from the fields he'd heard that same humming. A woman's voice. Calm, steady, drifting through the dark. He never told anyone, not officially, but now it was back, years later, after the well had been closed. When the story reached me, I didn't want to believe it. But when you hear the same detail from more than one officer, men who don't scare easy, you start to wonder. Over the next few months, it kept happening. Always near the farmhouse, always at night. The humming would start low, almost soft enough to ignore. But if you stopped, if you listened, it would grow clearer. Slow, careful, patient. Like someone rocking a baby that never stirs. The reports came from different people. Cops, hunters, even kids sneaking onto the land. They'd all say the same thing. It was coming from under the ground. One officer swore he put his ear to the concrete cap of the well. He said the sound was louder there, echoing from deep below. I asked him what it felt like. He looked at me for a long time before answering. He said it felt like the well was breathing. By then, the case file was unofficially open again, not because the department wanted it, but because no one could leave it alone. I was sent out one night with another detective to check the site. The grass had grown tall, waist-high, cutting across our pants as we walked. The farmhouse leaned into itself, the roof sagging like a broken spine. The well sat there in the middle, sealed, unmarked. We stood in the dark, flashlights off, just listening. At first, nothing. Just the chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through the weeds. Then it began, so faint I almost missed it. A thread of sound, weaving through the night. Humming. Low, steady, rocking back and forth, back and forth. I felt it crawl across my skin. My partner shifted beside me, whispering, "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because it wasn't just humming anymore. The longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't just one voice. It was layered. A woman. Yes. But underneath, softer, higher, the faintest sound of children. Dozens of them picking up the tune. Weak, broken, but following her lead like a choir. The air grew colder. My teeth clenched so tight my jaw ached. I forced myself to step closer, to the edge of the sealed well. The humming was louder there, vibrating through the concrete, through my boots, through my ribs, and then it changed, it slowed. Each note stretching, bending, and for just a moment it sounded like the voice was forming a word. Not English, not anything I knew, but something that didn't feel meant for us. I stumbled back. My partner grabbed my arm, pulling me away. His face was pale, his hands shaking. We didn't talk the whole drive back. In the days after, I told myself we imagined it. The mind playing tricks in the dark. Old cases bleeding into the present. But the sound stuck with me. It wasn't just humming, it was intentional. Like someone trying to soothe, trying to keep whatever was down there calm, or worse, trying to lull us closer. Other officers reported the same. One even claimed he heard his own name carried in the melody, the syllables drawn out, stretched thin. He quit the force a week later. Sometimes I think about the Carsons, the family that vanished. The neighbors swore they were close-knit, that the mother especially loved to sing to her children on the porch at night. Old lullabies, nothing recorded, nothing written down. What if that's what we're hearing now? Her voice, not alive, not dead, just trapped, carried on through the bones, through the earth, repeating itself in the dark throat of that well. I still drive past sometimes, not close, just along the road, far enough that the house is only a shadow in the corner of my eye. But even from there, with the windows rolled up and the radio on, I swear I can still hear it. Faint. Barely there. That humming. That lullaby. Like the land itself is trying to hush me to sleep. And I know If I ever stop the car, if I ever step back into that grass, it'll be waiting, not just for me, for anyone willing to listen, because the well was sealed, but not silenced, and some songs don't end. They just wait. It always begins with a number. For me, it was 313. That was the room we kept getting called about. Same hotel, same floor, same door. The first time I went out there, I thought it would be nothing. Just another welfare check, another guest who skipped out on the bill, or maybe someone passed out drunk. The place was known for that. The hotel itself was an old brick thing on the edge of town. The kind of place that had been nice once, probably in the 1950s when the highway first came through. But by the time I knew it, it was all peeling paint, buzzing neon, and a sour smell that clung to the halls. The manager who met us that night looked nervous. He kept wringing his hands, glancing at the staircase, like he didn't want to go up there. He said a guest had checked into 313 2 nights before and hadn't come out since. No noise, no movement. The maid swore she knocked and got no answer. That wasn't unusual on its own. People travel with their problems. They lock themselves away, sleep through the day, drown in whatever they bring with them. But the way the manager spoke, it was like he already knew something was wrong. We climbed the stairs. The hallway was dim, carpet-stained, dark in places you didn't want to think about. The numbers on the doors were tarnished brass, crooked on the wood. And then we stopped at 313. The door looked the same as all the others, but standing there, I felt watched. It wasn't the usual dread of a welfare check. It was deeper, colder, like the door itself didn't want us near it. I knocked. Announced myself, waited, silence. My partner tried the knob. It wasn't locked. We pushed it open. The smell hit first. Not rot, not exactly. More like mildew and stale air, thick enough to choke on. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking the streetlights outside. The room was dark, but I could still make out the shape of the bed, the dresser, the old TV bolted to the wall, and the suitcase. It sat on the floor near the bed, half unzipped. Clothes spilling out. Someone had unpacked in a hurry, like they were planning to stay. But the room was empty. No guest. No note. Nothing. We searched the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed. Nothing. It was as if the person had stepped into the room and never stepped out again. We filed the report. Chalked it up to someone sneaking away in the night. Happens more than you'd think. But then, 2 weeks later, it happened again. Different guest. Same room, same outcome. Vanished. After the third one, people started to notice. The maids refused to go near it. Guests complained about noises, soft tapping on the walls, the sound of running water when the pipes were dry. Some swore they saw shadows moving under the door when no one was inside. The manager begged us to do something. But what could we do? There was no crime scene, no body, no evidence of foul play, just emptiness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling from that first night. That weight in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. So I started digging. I pulled the hotel records. Most of them were incomplete, faded ledgers written by hand. Room numbers, check-in dates, names scribbled in shaky cursive. When I got to 313, my stomach tightened. The names repeated. Different handwriting, different years, but the same pattern. People checked in, and then nothing. No checkout. No forwarding address. No note in the margin. They simply ended, like the ledger itself swallowed them whole. I asked the manager about it. He turned pale, muttered something about bad luck. But when I pressed, he admitted there were stories. Rumors that went back decades. Some said a man hanged himself in that room in the 1960s. Others said a woman drowned in the bathtub, though the pipes didn't even run right anymore. Still others whispered about a drifter who disappeared there during a snowstorm, leaving only his boots by the bed. Each story different. Each one pointing to the same room. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started asking around, old-timers who'd lived in the area forever. Most shrugged me off, but a few got quiet when I mentioned 313. One woman told me her uncle stayed there when he was young. He went missing. Family never heard from him again. She said her grandmother used to swear she could hear him singing through the hotel walls on quiet nights. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted it to be just another story, the kind people pass around to make sense of things they can't explain. But I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. The suitcase left half unzipped. Clothes still folded, it didn't look like someone who had walked away. It looked like someone who meant to come back and never did. The last time I was in that hotel, I made the mistake of stepping into 313 alone. It was daytime, sunlight pressing weakly through the curtains. I stood in the center of the room, listening. At first, nothing. Then the faintest sound, a low creak, like someone shifting their weight on the bed behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. The bedspread was smooth, untouched, but I swear, no, I know, I saw the corner dip just slightly, like someone had just sat down. The air pressed heavy in my chest. My throat tightened. I stumbled back, out the door, slammed it shut behind me. The manager told me later that the room would be closed for good. Boarded up. But I've heard that before. Places like that don't stay empty. Someone always pries the boards loose. Someone always steps inside, and when they do, they don't come back. That's the truth of 313. It isn't a room, it's a mouth, and it keeps eating. I didn't mean to go back. After what I felt in room 313, I swore I was done with that place. I told myself I'd leave it alone, let it rot, let it keep its secrets. But the thing about secrets is, they don't stay quiet, not when you've already cracked them open. A week later, I was sitting at my desk in the station, staring at the old hotel ledger I'd borrowed. It smelled like dust and mildew, the paper thin enough to crumble if I wasn't careful. Most of the entries were normal. Families traveling, salesmen passing through, drifters with no fixed address. But when I reached the section for room 313, I saw it, 4 names written over and over, decade after decade, not the same handwriting, not even the same ink, but the same names, always grouped together, like a pattern etched into time. Harold Finch, Margaret Hale, Thomas Beck, Eleanor Price. The first time I saw them, I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was coincidence. People share names all the time, but the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't coincidence at all. Every 10 years, almost like clockwork, those names appeared, all the way up to the 2000s. The ledger told the same story each time. They checked into 313, and then nothing, no checkout date, no forwarding address, just a line left open, like the story was unfinished. I remember sitting there, running my finger down the page, tracing those 4 names as the room around me seemed to grow colder. My partner asked what I was looking at. I lied. I said it was nothing, because I knew if I spoke the truth out loud, it would become real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying those names in my head. Finch, Hale, Beck, Price, over and over, like a chant. The next morning, I went back to the hotel. The manager wasn't happy to see me. He'd already boarded up 313 with a sheet of plywood, hammer marks still fresh on the frame. But when I told him what I'd found in the ledger, his face went pale. He didn't ask how I knew. He just said, "So you saw them too?" I asked what he meant. He said his father used to run the hotel back when he was a boy. He remembered his father whispering about the guests who always returned. He thought it was just a story to scare him into staying out of the ledgers. But when he took over, he saw the pattern himself. He swore he'd burn the books one day, but he never did. I asked if he knew who they were. He shook his head, said he never wanted to find out. But I couldn't leave it alone. I started digging. Old town records, newspaper archives, anything I could find. At first, nothing. The names were too common, too scattered. But then I narrowed the years. Every decade, same year, same hotel, and then I found them. Harold Finch, a schoolteacher in the 1950s, reported missing during a road trip. Margaret Hale, a secretary in the 1960s, disappeared while traveling alone. Thomas Beck, a factory worker in the 1970s, last seen leaving for vacation. Eleanor Price, a college student in the 1980s, never came home after spring break. Different towns, different lives, but all gone the same way. Each one vanished the year their name appeared in that ledger. I can't describe the feeling that washed over me as I pieced it together. My stomach turned cold, my hands shook. It was like staring into a hole that had no bottom. And the worst part wasn't that they disappeared. The worst part was that they came back. Every decade, their names returned to that ledger, as if they were checking in again, as if they never left. I remember whispering the names under my breath in the empty records room, hearing them echo off the walls. Finch, Hale, Beck, Price. I almost expected someone to answer. By then, I knew this wasn't just about missing persons. This was something older, something that didn't fit into reports or files, something the ledger wasn't just recording, it was feeding. I should have stopped. I should have closed the book, turned off the lights, gone home. But I didn't. I kept digging. One night, I stayed late at the station, staring at the ledger under the harsh glow of the desk lamp. The ink on the most recent page looked darker than the rest, as if it had been written yesterday. I reached out and touched the name Eleanor Price, half expecting it to smear beneath my finger. Instead, the paper felt warm, not like old paper should. Not brittle or cool, warm like skin. I pulled my hand back fast, heart racing. But when I leaned closer, I saw something else. Tiny indentations in the paper, like fingernail marks pressed into the page. I don't know how long I sat there staring. But eventually, I realized I wasn't alone. The station was quiet, but I swear I heard breathing. Not mine, not anyone else's. Slow, steady, as if someone was leaning right over my shoulder. I froze. Didn't dare move, and then, faint as a whisper, I heard it. A woman's voice. Room 313. The words slipped across the back of my neck, cold as ice. I spun around, but the room was empty. The ledger lay open on the desk, the 4 names staring back at me. That was the night I knew this wasn't about people checking in. It wasn't about the hotel at all. It was about the ledger. It was keeping them, holding them, and writing them back into the world. Again and again, like a story that refuses to end. Since then, I can't stop seeing those names. I dream about them. I hear them whispered in quiet places. Sometimes I think I see figures in the corner of my eye, just shapes, just shadows. But deep down, I know who they are. Harold, Margaret, Thomas, Eleanor, the guests who never leave. And every time I think of them, I wonder, whose name will be next? Because patterns don't just stop. They keep going, and the ledger, it's not finished. Not yet. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Cologne. Sharp. Expensive, lingering in the hallway outside room 313. It was faint, but in that hotel, faint smells carried far. The place reeked of damp wood, mold, old carpets that hadn't been cleaned in decades. But this scent, it didn't belong. It was too fresh, too alive. We stood there staring at the door. My partner rattled the handle, then stepped back. "It's locked," he muttered, like that explained anything. But the thing was, room 313 was supposed to be empty. The manager had sealed it off weeks ago, boarded it up, swore to me no one had stepped foot inside since. And yet the smell, that damned cologne. We tried the master key, nothing. Tried forcing the handle, nothing. The door held tight, solid like it hadn't been opened in years. Finally, maintenance came with a crowbar. We braced ourselves as the door cracked, hinges groaning like an animal in pain. And then it opened. The room was empty. No guests, no luggage, not even a sheet out of place. Just the stale air of a hotel room that had been left to rot. Except for the smell, stronger now, thick, clinging to the back of my throat. I knew that scent. My grandfather used to wear something like it. Old-fashioned, musky, the kind of cologne you'd expect on a man who still polished his shoes every night. But there was no bottle, no trace of it anywhere. Just the odor, as if someone had been standing right there moments before we broke in, and the lock. I tested it myself. Deadbolt turned from the inside. The chain latch still hooked. No broken glass, no hidden exits. Whoever, or whatever, had been inside hadn't left through that door. It was impossible. My partner searched every inch. Closet, bathroom, even checked under the bed. Nothing. Just silence pressing in on us. The kind that makes your ears ring. I tried to steady myself. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong the room felt. Like we weren't alone even though we were. Like someone had just stepped out and would be back any second. That's when I saw the ledger again. It was still in my bag, but I swear I felt it pressing against my side, heavy as stone. I didn't want to open it, not in there, but my hand moved anyway. The book fell open on its own like it knew where it wanted me to look, and there they were. The four names. Written again? Not 10 years later. Not decades apart. But now, Harold Finch, Margaret Hale, Thomas Beck, Eleanor Price, all signed under the date of that very morning. I dropped the book like it burned me. Pages fanned out across the floor, the smell of cologne thickening until I could barely breathe. My partner swore under his breath. But he didn't see what I saw. On the inside of the door, just beneath the latch, was a handprint, pressed into the wood. Not painted, not marked, imprinted. Like the grain itself had shifted beneath a palm. 5 fingers. Long, too long. I ran my hand over it. The wood was warm. I don't remember leaving that room. One minute I was staring at the handprint, and the next I was back in the hallway, gasping for air like I'd just surfaced from deep water. The manager refused to step inside. He kept shaking his head, mumbling that the room had been locked since his father sealed it. He looked at us like we were the intruders, not whatever left that smell behind. We taped the door shut, posted a notice, promised we'd be back with forensics. But we never came back. Not really. That night, I woke up choking on the scent of cologne in my own house. My clothes smelled like it, my sheets, even my hands. No amount of scrubbing got it off. I thought maybe I'd gone mad. Maybe the ledger had gotten into my head, carving those names so deep I could smell ghosts. But then my partner called me. His voice shook. He said he woke up to knocking, slow, steady at his front door. But when he opened it, no one was there. Only the faintest whiff of cologne drifting down the empty street. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, I opened the ledger again, praying it was empty. But no, there was a new line, not just the 4 names, a 5th mine written in ink that hadn't been there before. The handwriting wasn't mine, but the letters curved exactly the way I wrote them. I sat there staring until my eyes blurred, the smell of cologne filling the room. And for the first time, I understood. The ledger didn't just record names, it chose them. And once you were written in, there was no getting out. That night, I dreamt of room 313. I was standing inside it. The bed neatly made, the curtains drawn tight. The air was heavy, suffocating, soaked in that same scent. And behind me, though I couldn't see him, I felt someone standing close enough that I could hear the faint sound of breathing. I turned. The door was locked from the inside. I thought I was done with that place. Room 313, the cologne. The ledger with my name written in a hand that wasn't mine. I told myself I'd never go back to that hotel, never step inside those rotting walls again. But the truth is, the hotel doesn't let you go. Not once you've seen its book, not once it's written you in, years past. I changed apartments, changed cases, tried to bury it under the endless grind of paperwork and new faces. But some nights when I couldn't sleep, I'd catch the faintest trace of that smell. Cologne creeping under the door of my own bedroom. And I'd lie there wide awake, waiting for the sound of someone breathing just beyond the dark. Then one morning, a detective from another precinct called me. He sounded nervous, like he was about to say something ridiculous. He told me they'd been reviewing security footage from that old hotel. The city was planning to demolish it, so they'd set up cameras just to make sure squatters didn't break in. What they caught didn't make sense. He asked if I'd come take a look. I should have said no. God knows I should have. But something inside me needed to see. Like part of me already knew what was waiting. The surveillance footage was grainy, black and white, recorded from an angle above the lobby desk. The date stamp was only a few weeks old. The hotel had been abandoned for years by then, windows broken, pipes leaking, dust coating everything. But on the screen, the lobby looked alive. The desk light was on. The bell on the counter gleamed like it had just been polished. And there was movement, not bodies. Not shapes, just shadows, faint impressions, the kind that flicker at the edge of your vision. And then came the sound. The detective played the audio. It was soft at first, static, the hum of old wiring. But then, voices, whispering, dozens of them, low and overlapping like people in line at a theater. You couldn't make out full sentences, just murmurs, words bleeding into one another. Except when they spoke the names. The names came clear. Margaret Hale, Thomas Beck, Eleanor Price, Harold Finch. each whispered as if leaned close to the microphone. Each spoken with a kind of intimacy that turned my stomach. Then silence. The desk bell rang. One sharp note, like someone pressing it with care, and the ledger. It was there on the counter in the footage. Not dusty, not worn. Open. Pages turning on their own as if guided by invisible hands. One by one, the whispers spoke the names again, each followed by the faint scratch of pen on paper. The detective paused the footage. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept. "We had techs analyze it," he said. "They swear no one was in that building. No power, no working phones, nothing. But he didn't need to say it. I already knew. The hotel was still taking guests. I asked him to play the recording again, even though my chest tightened just hearing those voices. And that's when I heard it. After the 4 names, there was a 5th, my own, whispered so softly it almost disappeared in the static. The sound of a pen scratching followed. I stumbled out of the room, bile rising in my throat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It felt like the walls were closing in. They hadn't just written me in once. They were still writing me in. Every time the ledger opened, my name came back. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. A trick of the audio. Maybe I wanted to hear it, and so I did. But that night, when I got home, the smell was waiting. Stronger than ever. The same cologne seeping through the cracks in my walls, clinging to my skin. And there was something else. A voice. I'd barely shut the door when I heard it. Faint. A whisper. Just behind me. "Check in." I froze. My whole body turned to ice. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Check in. This time it was closer. Just beside my ear, I ran to the bathroom, slammed the door, locked it. I sat on the cold tile floor with my back to the tub, shaking, trying not to cry. I stayed there for hours, too afraid to move. When I finally opened the door, the smell was gone. The whisper was gone. But on my kitchen table, the ledger was waiting. I hadn't brought it home. I swear I hadn't. I'd left it in evidence lockup years ago. But there it was, sitting in the center of the table like it had been waiting for me all along. The pages were open. My name filled every line, not once, not twice, hundreds of times. Page after page of my name scrawled in black ink. Different handwriting, different sizes, some neat, some frantic, but always mine. Always me. I slammed it shut, stuffed it in a drawer, tried not to touch it again, but the whispers didn't stop. Every night, just as I started to drift off, I'd hear them. A lobby full of voices murmuring all at once. Names spoken over and over. Some I didn't recognize. Some I did. My partner, my family, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, and always, always my own. I thought about burning it, throwing it into a fire and watching the pages curl into ash. But I couldn't bring myself to. Part of me knew it wouldn't matter. The hotel doesn't need the book. The book just makes it easier. One night, I got desperate. I went back to the footage. I watched the whispers play out again, the names, the signing, the bell. But this time, something caught my eye. In the reflection of the lobby's glass doors, I saw them. 4 figures, faint and pale, standing in line, waiting to check in. Their faces blurred, but their posture, it was patient, calm, as though they'd been standing there forever. Behind them, at the end of the line, was another figure, taller, shoulders hunched, waiting with them. I leaned closer, squinting at the reflection, and then for a split second, the figure lifted its head, and I saw my own face, staring back at me. The bell rang. The screen went black. It started with a sound, not a voice, not exactly. More like the ghost of one, buried under static. Most people don't know how thin the thread is between silence and chaos on a police radio. One second it's quiet, the next it's a storm of voices, clipped words, codes that barely make sense even to us. But when the call came through that night, everything else stopped. The frequency froze. And all we heard was him, Officer Daniel Mercer. I didn't know him well. We'd crossed paths once or twice at the station, nodded at each other in the parking lot, maybe swapped a joke in passing. He was young, steady, the kind of officer people liked. No one expected his name to end up in the files that live in the basement, in the cabinets we all pretend don't exist. But Mercer's case went there. Because of his last call, it was late. Nearly 3 a.m. His cruiser had gone silent for hours, parked somewhere off Route 6, an old highway that barely anyone used anymore. The dispatcher finally reached out, asked for a status. That's when it came through. At first, it sounded like wind, just a hiss of white noise. Then, faintly, words began to take shape. Broken, strained. Can you hear me? The room went quiet. Everyone leaned toward their radios, straining to make it out. Not alone. Something with me? The dispatcher tried to get him to repeat, but the signal crackled, splintered. You could almost hear him struggling against it, like the radio itself was swallowing his voice. Don't let... Find me, please! Then nothing. The line went dead. Units were sent immediately. They found his cruiser on the shoulder of the highway, lights still flashing, driver's side door wide open. No sign of Mercer. The road was empty. The trees along the shoulder swayed in the wind. But there were no footprints, no tire marks. Nothing to show where he'd gone. The radio was still on. When they checked the dash cam, it was worse. The video started clear enough. Mercer in the driver's seat, talking to dispatch, routine stuff. But then, around the time his call went strange, the camera began to flicker. The image bent and warped like heat waves rising off asphalt. Mercer leaned forward, staring into the darkness beyond the windshield. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then his head snapped to the side, as though something had tapped the window. Nothing there, just trees. He opened the door, stepped out. The dash cam caught only the back of his vest, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark. He walked toward the tree line. The light grew smaller, until it vanished. The video froze on the empty road, and then the audio picked up something else. Not words, not human. A low hum, steady and rising, like feedback from a speaker. And layered beneath it, a whisper, too faint to make out. For 32 minutes, the camera recorded only darkness, static, and that hum. Then the battery died. We never saw Mercer again. That should have been the end of it. Another cold file, another case that lived in silence. But it wasn't, because the call didn't stop with him. A week later, another officer swore he heard Mercer's voice on his radio. He was on patrol across town when the signal broke with static. Through the noise, he heard the same words. Can you hear me? Dispatch checked the logs. No one had transmitted on that frequency at that time. But the officer swore it was him. 2 days after that, a unit in the next county heard it too. Same words, same broken tone. Sometimes the voice said more. Fragments about the dark, about not being alone. Always strained, always half buried in static. They tried to trace it. Radio techs brought in equipment, tried to pinpoint where the signal was coming from. But every time they got close, it slipped. It moved, like it didn't want to be found. The strangest thing? Every recording was different. Not by much, just small details. A breath here, an extra word there. Like the call was still happening, still unfolding in pieces, and always the same last line. Don't let... Find me, please! I listened to those tapes more times than I can count. My ears ringing from the static, my head aching from trying to pull sense out of the noise. Each time I thought I'd hear something new. And I did. On the 15th listen, I caught it. A second voice, soft, buried so deep under Mercer's that you could almost miss it. When he said, don't let... Find me! The other voice echoed the words, not repeating them, finishing them, as if it knew what he was about to say before he did. That's when it... I've seen a lot of crime scenes in my life. Houses ransacked, alleys stained with blood, cars wrapped around poles. But nothing ever settled in my stomach the way Mercer's cruiser did the night we found it. The call had gone out hours earlier. No one could reach him. His last words were already turning into rumor. Dispatch replaying the broken message like it might mean something different the next time. And then a highway crew spotted the glow of police lights down an unpaved service road, a mile past the turnoff where Mercer was last logged. We rolled out fast. I was one of the first on scene. The cruiser was there, idling in the dark, headlights still cutting through dust. Driver's side door wide open like someone had stepped out in a hurry. Inside, the radio crackled with empty static. The dash cam's red light blinked, still recording, but there was no sign of him. No footprints in the dirt. No trail leading into the trees. Just the car, humming like it was waiting for its driver to come back. The first thing I noticed was how warm the engine was. I placed my hand on the hood, half expecting it to burn me. He couldn't have been gone long. Maybe minutes, maybe seconds. But the road was empty in both directions. No tire marks, no dust clouds, nothing but silence. We fanned out, called his name. Our voices carried into the trees and came back hollow. The beam of my flashlight picked out twisted branches, broken fence posts, a ditch choked with weeds. Nothing moved, not even the insects. It was like the world had paused around his absence. I went back to the cruiser, leaned into the driver's seat. The smell hit me first. Not blood, not sweat. Something sharper. Ozone, maybe. The way the air smells after lightning splits a tree. Mercer's notepad was still on the passenger seat. His pen was uncapped, lying across the page. He'd written only 2 words before whatever happened pulled him away. Not alone. I just stared at it. The words were heavy, rushed. The kind you scratch down when you know there's no time left. The camera was still running. We pulled the SD card and played it back later at the station. But even before I saw the footage, I knew it wasn't going to give us answers. Because the car itself already felt like evidence of something impossible. The dome light was on, but it flickered. Not like a bulb about to die, but like it was fighting with something. A push and pull of brightness. When I tapped it with my finger, it steadied for a few seconds. Then it started again. I can't explain why, but it made me feel like the car was breathing. We checked the trunk, the back seat, under the chassis. Nothing. No signs of a struggle. His service weapon was still in its holster on the driver's seat, like he'd taken it off for just a moment. His radio handset dangled by its cord, swaying slightly as though someone had just brushed past it, but no one had. Not anyone we could see. There was one more thing. And to this day, I wish I hadn't opened the glove compartment. Inside was Mercer's spare flashlight. It was still on, its beam swallowed by the confined space. But it wasn't steady. The light pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. I held it in my hand, shook it, smacked it against my palm. The beam didn't die. It just kept beating. I should have turned it off. I should have left it there. But I kept staring, my own pulse trying to match its rhythm. And in that moment, I swore I heard something faint under the hum of the engine. Something like a whisper, pressed close against my ear. I dropped the flashlight. When I looked up, the others were watching me, waiting for me to explain why I'd gone pale. But I didn't tell them. Not then, because what could I say? That Mercer had left his car running, his notes unfinished, his door wide open. Because something whispered to him? No one would have believed me. We had to tow the car back to the impound. Nobody wanted to sit behind the wheel, so they chained it up and pulled it in with a truck. As we followed behind, I couldn't stop watching the way the headlights swung across the trees. It felt like something was moving just beyond them, keeping pace, slipping out of sight whenever the beams drew near. At the station, we sealed the car in the garage, locked it down as evidence. The engine was still warm when we left it, even after hours had passed. And then came the dash cam footage. We gathered in the briefing room, blinds drawn, the card slotted into the player. The screen came alive with the empty road, Mercer's face lit by the glow of the console. He looked calm at first, just another routine patrol. Then his expression shifted. His head tilted, like he'd heard something faint. He spoke into the radio, but the words were scrambled by static. His eyes moved toward the trees. And then he froze, like something had caught him. His whole body stiffened. The dashcam lens blurred for a split second, like a hand had pressed against it, smearing the view. When it cleared, Mercer was already stepping out, flashlight in hand. We watched as the beam cut into the tree line. Then he vanished. The camera lingered on the open door, the empty seat. And then the sound began. A hum, low and steady, building in waves. The kind of sound that doesn't just enter your ears, but presses into your chest. Underneath it, a whisper. The same broken words he'd tried to say in his final call. Not alone, not alone. The officers in the room shifted uncomfortably. Someone muttered about audio corruption. But I saw their faces. I knew they heard what I did. There were 2 voices, Mercer's, and another one, softer, overlapping his words, as if something had been in the car with him the whole time. When the video ended, the room was silent. Nobody looked at each other. Nobody spoke, because the truth was already clear. Mercer hadn't just vanished. He'd been taken from inside his own cruiser, engine running, lights on, the world still turning around him, and whatever was with him that night, it wasn't gone. The car was still humming in the garage, still waiting. I always thought time would dull the edges of Mercer's case. Most files do eventually. The faces blur, the details fade, and the horror of it all gets pressed flat under years of other tragedies. But not this one. This one stayed sharp. Every time I walked past the evidence locker, I could feel it. Like the case was leaning against the door from the inside, waiting for someone to open it again. Decades passed. I made detective, then senior, then retired. I thought I'd left it all behind. But Mercer's cruiser, Mercer's dash cam, Mercer's last words, they followed me. Even in sleep. Especially in sleep. Then, a few months ago, I got a call from an old colleague still working cold cases. His voice was low, strained. He didn't say much, just, "We pulled the tape again." That's all it took. I knew exactly what he meant. The dash cam footage had been played 100 times. Studied, remastered, broken apart frame by frame. The same conclusion every time. Mercer steps out, disappears, nothing else visible. Static fills the car, then the whispers, then silence. The end. But something had changed. They'd digitized the old tapes recently, fed them through new filters, software that could split the tiniest frequencies from the noise. And in doing so, they'd heard something else. Something no one had noticed before. I told him not to tell me. I told him I didn't want to know. But he just laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. "You should hear it yourself," he said. "Because it says your name." I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember driving to the precinct or signing the visitor log. I only remember sitting in that small gray room with the monitor in front of me, my palms sweating, my heart rattling against my ribs like a locked drawer. They cued the footage. The same opening frames. Mercer's face calm at first, then tilting toward the trees. His lips moving, his voice breaking through static. Then the door opening, his flashlight beam cutting into the dark. Then nothing. The seat empty, the car breathing in static. But when the hum rose, when the whispers bled through, I heard it. Clearer than I ever wanted. Not alone. Not alone. And then, layered under his words, tangled in them like vines around stone, came another voice. It wasn't deep. It wasn't high. It wasn't male or female. It was familiar. And it whispered my name. Not once. Not loud. Just soft, deliberate. Like someone leaning close enough that their breath touched the back of my neck. I froze. My throat went dry. The others in the room kept their eyes on the monitor, but I couldn't. I turned away, staring at the wall, waiting for the sound to end. But it didn't. Even when the footage stopped, I could still hear it. Like it had moved from the speakers into the room itself. My name, drawn out in a voice that seemed to know me better than I knew myself. They played it again. Slowed it down, split the tracks. The voice was still there. Stronger even. It hadn't been a trick of the static. It had always been on the tape. Waiting for technology to catch up, and it knew me. It shouldn't have been possible. That recording was older than most of the people in the room. Older than the tech, older than the case's relevance. Yet it had spoken my name, as if it had been waiting decades just for me to press play. I didn't tell them how it made me feel. How hearing it was like being remembered by something I had never met. How it felt less like a warning and more like an invitation. The others tried to rationalize it. Pareidolia, they called it. The brain's trick of finding patterns in noise. One detective even said maybe it wasn't my name at all. Just something close. But I knew better. Because when I got home that night, alone in the dark, I replayed the digitized copy they gave me. I put on headphones, shut my eyes, and listened. And there it was, the same whisper, but this time, it wasn't just my name. It said the word come, not loud, not insistent, just patient, like it had waited decades already and could wait decades more. I ripped the headphones off, slammed the laptop shut, and sat in silence, my chest heaving. But the problem was I could still hear it, not from the tape, not from the machine, from somewhere deeper, inside. For days, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, echoing what I'd already heard. But every night, the whisper returned. At first faint, then louder. At times, it came from corners of the room where no one stood. Other times, it drifted out of the vents or rose up from the drain when I turned on the shower. Always the same. My name, followed by that patient command. Come. I stopped sleeping. I stopped leaving the house. I couldn't risk being around people. What if it said their names next? What if this wasn't just mine to carry? I thought about Mercer. About his unfinished note, his stiff body frozen in fear. Not alone, that's what he wrote. And I finally understood. It hadn't been a warning. It had been a confession. Whatever he'd heard that night, whatever pulled him out of his cruiser, wasn't chasing him. It was calling him. The same way it was calling me, not alone. Never alone. Because once it knows your name, you belong to it. The precinct tried to move on. The others said the case was still unsolved. But I stopped listening. The truth isn't something you can lock in evidence. The truth is that Mercer didn't vanish. He answered, and now, it wants me to do the same. The whisper hasn't stopped. It's in the walls, in the silence between breaths, in the faint hum of electricity when I turn out the lights. Always the same words, always patient. My name. And then, come. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Maybe when they find my empty house, my car still running in the driveway, they'll reopen Mercer's file. Maybe they'll pull the tape again, and maybe then. Maybe it will whisper their names, too. And when it does, they'll understand what I do now. The voice on the tape isn't trapped. It was never trapped. It's waiting, and sooner or later we all answer.